A fog-draped manor, a priceless sapphire vanishes in a heartbeat of darkness. Hercule Poirot steps into Ravenwood Manor, where every guest hides a secret, and every shadow whispers betrayal. Who stole the cursed gem? Why does Lady Eleanor's smile conceal fear? In 30 seconds, the stage is set for Agatha Christie's Sneakiest mystery. Will Poirot's little gray cells unravel the truth before the next blackout strikes? Chapter 1. The invitation to Ravenwood Manor. The fog clung to the cobblestones of London's Baker Street like a conspirator, shrouding the city in a damp, conspiratorial hush. Hercule Poirot, seated by the crackling fire in his meticulously ordered apartment, adjusted his pince-nez and unfolded the letter that had arrived with the morning post. Its cream vellum, embossed with a crest of a raven clutching a sapphire, bore the faint scent of lavender and wax. The handwriting, elegant yet urgent, hinted at secrets too heavy for ordinary paper. Monsieur Poirot, it began, your reputation as a man of unparalleled insight precedes you. I, Lady Eleanor Ravenwood, humbly request your presence at Ravenwood Manor in the Yorkshire moors this coming weekend. A delicate matter, one that requires discretion and your singular genius, awaits. I cannot divulge more in writing, but rest assured, the stakes are high, and the reward for your attendance will be commensurate. A car will collect you at noon on Friday. Yours, in anticipation, Eleanor Ravenwood. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle signal of his piqued curiosity. Yorkshire was far from the comforts of London, and Lady Eleanor's vagueness was as tantalizing as it was suspicious. He knew of the Ravenwood family, old money, older scandals, and a manor that whispered of Gothic intrigue. The delicate matter could be anything: a theft, a blackmail, or, heaven forbid, something as pedestrian as a family feud. But the crest, the sapphire, the urgency, it stirred the little gray cells. Hastings, Poirot called, his voice sharp but warm. His friend and confidant, Captain Arthur Hastings, lounged in an armchair, engrossed in a newspaper's racing column. What do you know of Ravenwood Manor? Hastings lowered the paper, his brow furrowing. Ravenwood, old pile in Yorkshire, isn't it? Belongs to that eccentric widow, Lady Eleanor. There's talk of a cursed gem or some such nonsense. Why, Poirot, planning a holiday. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A holiday. Nong. An adventure. Perhaps we are invited, you and I, to unravel a mystery. He handed Hastings the letter, watching as his friend's face shifted from curiosity to excitement. By Jove, Poirot, this sounds like a proper lark. Shall I pack my revolver? Poirot waved a dismissive hand. Your enthusiasm, mon ami, is weapon enough, but pack lightly. The moors are no place for excess baggage. By Friday noon, a sleek black Daimler idled outside Poirot's apartment, its driver a taciturn man with a scar tracing his jawline. The journey north was long, the landscape shifting from London's bustle to the rolling green of the countryside, then to the stark, wind-swept moors. The fog thickened as they climbed, and Ravenwood Manor emerged like a spectre, a sprawling Gothic edifice of weathered stone, its turrets piercing the mist. Ivy clung to its walls like secrets, and the windows glowed with an amber warmth that felt more ominous than inviting. The driver deposited Poirot and Hastings at the grand entrance, where a butler awaited. He was tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of Poirot's appearance: his polished shoes, his immaculate suit, the precise curl of his mustache. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, the butler intoned, his voice smooth as polished oak, I am Grayson. Lady Eleanor awaits you in the drawing-room. This way. The interior of Ravenwood Manor was a study in opulence and decay. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, their light casting shadows across faded tapestries. The air smelled of old wood, wax, and something faintly metallic. Grayson led them through a labyrinth of corridors, each lined with portraits of stern-faced Ravenwoods, their eyes following the visitors with silent judgment. In the drawing-room, Lady Eleanor Ravenwood stood by a roaring fire, her silhouette framed against the flames. She was in her late 50s, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald gown a nod to a bygone era. Her eyes, sharp and searching, met Poirot's with an intensity that belied her gracious smile. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings?" "Welcome," she said, her voice rich with a trace of Yorkshire burr. "You honor us with your presence. Please, sit." The room was already alive with guests, each a distinct note in the symphony of suspicion Poirot sensed. There was Julian Marsh, a reclusive artist with ink-stained fingers and a haunted expression, sketching absently on a napkin. Miss Clara Beaumont, a young heiress, lounged with the confidence of wealth, her sapphire earrings catching the firelight as she sipped champagne. Colonel Sir Reginald Thorne, retired and ramrod straight, nursed a whiskey and muttered about the weather, and Grayson, the butler, hovered at the edges, his presence as unobtrusive yet omnipresent as the fog outside. Poirot settled into a velvet armchair, his posture impeccable. "Lady Eleanor, your letter spoke of a delicate matter. Perhaps you might enlighten us." Her smile tightened, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "In due time, Monsieur Poirot. Tonight, we dine and become acquainted. Tomorrow, we shall discuss particulars." Hastings, less patient, leaned forward. "Come now, Lady Eleanor. Surely you can give us a hint." "We've come all this way." Lady Eleanor's gaze darted to the other guests, then back to Poirot. "Let us say that Ravenwood Manor holds secrets, Captain. Secrets that require a mind like Monsieur Poirot's to unravel. But for now, enjoy the hospitality." Dinner was announced, and the party moved to a dining room dominated by a long mahogany table. Crystal goblets gleamed, and silverware clinked as servants presented a feast of roast pheasant, truffled potatoes, and a claret that Poirot deemed acceptable, if not exceptional. The conversation, however, was far from convivial. Clara Beaumont's sharp tongue sparred with Julian Marsh's brooding silences, while Colonel Thorne recounted military anecdotes that grew more improbable with each glass of whiskey. Grayson, ever watchful, refilled glasses with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Poirot observed, his mind cataloguing details. Clara's nervous habit of twisting her earrings, Julian's refusal to meet anyone's gaze, the Colonel's overly loud laugh that masked something brittle. Lady Eleanor presided with grace, but her eyes betrayed a restlessness, as if she were waiting for a storm to break. As dessert a delicate lemon souffle was served, the lights flickered. A collective gasp rose from the table, and for a moment, darkness enveloped the room. When the chandelier flared back to life, Lady Eleanor stood, her face pale. "My friends," she said, her voice trembling, "I must show you something. Follow me." She led them to the drawing room, where a glass case stood on a pedestal, its velvet cushion empty. "The Ravenwood sapphire," she whispered. "It is gone." The room erupted in murmurs. Clara clutched her pearls. Julian's pencil snapped in his hand, and Colonel Thorne's face reddened with indignation. Grayson, impassive, stepped forward. "Shall I summon the staff, my lady?" "No," Lady Eleanor said sharply. "This is why Monsieur Poirot is here. I trust he will find the truth." Poirot rose, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "Mesdames et messieurs, the game, it has begun. The sapphire, it is not merely a gem, but a key to secrets. I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover them." Chapter 2. The missing sapphire-red dining hall of Ravenwood Manor glowed with the soft flicker of candelabras, their flames trembling as if sharing whispered secrets with the heavy velvet curtains. The air was rich with the aroma of roasted pheasant, glazed figs, and a faint, almost imperceptible trace of old oak from the manor walls. Hercule Poirot, seated at the center of the long mahogany table, adjusted his pristine white napkin with a practiced flick of his mustache twitching as he surveyed the eclectic assembly of guests. The grandeur of the room, with its towering ceilings and ancestral portraits, seemed at odds with the undercurrent of unease that pulsed beneath the surface of every glance and gesture. Lady Eleanor Ravenwood, a woman of statuesque poise whose Silver hair gleamed like moonlight on frost, presided at the head of the table. Her emerald eyes, sharp as the facets of the gem she would soon unveil, flickered over her guests with a smile that was both gracious and inscrutable. To her right sat Miss Clara Beaumont, the heiress whose auburn curls bounced with every animated gesture, her laughter a touch too bright, as if masking a deeper agitation. Opposite her was Sir Reginald Thorne, a retired colonel whose military bearing was as stiff as his starched collar, his weathered face etched with the stoicism of a man accustomed to battle, but unnerved by the subtler warfare of social intrigue. Beside him, Julian Marsh, the reclusive artist, hunched over his plate, his ink-stained fingers fidgeting with a silver fork as if sketching invisible lines in the air. At the foot of the table stood Mr. Grayson, the butler, his demeanor so impeccably composed it bordered on the spectral, his gray eyes darting with an alertness that belied his servile posture. Poirot's keen mind catalogued these details as he sipped his tisane, the delicate porcelain cup dwarfed by his gloved hands. The letter from Lady Eleanor, with its enigmatic promise of a delicate matter, had piqued his curiosity, but it was the guest's behavior that now held him captive. Clara's frequent glances toward the mantelpiece, where an ornate mahogany case rested, suggested anticipation or perhaps dread. Sir Reginald's clipped responses to Julian's halting attempts at conversation hinted at a simmering disdain, while Julian himself seemed lost in a world of his own, muttering about the tyranny of color. Mr. Grayson's seamless orchestration of the meal refilling glasses without a sound, directing the maids with a mere tilt of his head, struck Poirot as a performance too flawless to be unpracticed. "My dear friends," Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur of cutlery, rich and resonant as a cello. She rose, her chair scraping softly against the marble floor, and all eyes turned to her. "Tonight is not merely a gathering of fine company, but an occasion to share something extraordinary." She gestured toward the mantelpiece, where the mahogany case gleamed under the chandelier's light. "Within this case lies the Ravenwood sapphire, a jewel of unparalleled beauty and, some say, a curse." A ripple of murmurs passed through the guests. Clara's hand froze mid-gesture, her wine-glass hovering near her lips. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming a silent march on the tablecloth. Julian's eyes widened, a feverish glint in their depths, as if the mention of the sapphire had ignited some inner spark. Mr. Grayson, stationed by the door, remained impassive, though Poirot noted the slightest tightening of his gloved hands. Lady Eleanor crossed to the mantelpiece, her silk gown whispering against the floor. With a flourish, she unlocked the case, using a small silver key from her bracelet, and lifted the lid. Nestled on a bed of black velvet lay the Ravenwood sapphire gem the size of a quail's egg, its deep blue heart pulsing with an almost unearthly radiance. The candlelight danced across its facets, casting prismatic shadows that seemed to writhe like specters on the walls. Magnificent, Clara breathed, leaning forward, her eyes alight with a hunger Poirot found telling. "Indeed," Sir Reginald said gruffly, though his gaze lingered on the gem with a curiosity that belied his brusque tone. "A fine piece. Indian, I presume, older than that," Lady Eleanor replied, her smile enigmatic. "Its origins are lost to history, though its curse is well documented. Betrayal follows its keepers, or so the legend goes." Her tone was light, but her eyes scanned the room, as if gauging each guest's reaction. Julian let out a soft, almost reverent sigh. "It's alive," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "The way it holds the light like a trapped star." Poirot, silent until now, tilted his head. "A beautiful object, oui, but beauty often conceals danger. Does it not, Lady Eleanor?" Her laughter was like crystal. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps that is why I invited you." She closed the case with a snap, locking it once more. "Let us enjoy our meal. The sapphire will keep its secrets for now." The dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversation grew stilted, punctuated by the clink of silverware and the occasional burst of Clara's forced laughter. Poirot observed it all, the way Sir Reginald's eyes flicked to the mantelpiece every few minutes, as if ensuring the case remained untouched. The faint tremor in Julian's hand as he reached for his glass. The subtle deference in Mr. Grayson's movements, as if he were not merely serving but studying, and Lady Eleanor, presiding over it all, her serene composure masking what? Amusement, calculation. As the dessert course poached pears drizzled with caramel was served, the storm that had been brewing over the Yorkshire moors broke with sudden ferocity. Thunder rumbled, shaking the window panes, and a gust of wind snuffed out half the candles, plunging the room into a twilight of flickering shadows. Clara gasped, her hand clutching her necklace. Sir Reginald muttered something about damned weather, while Julian stared at the darkened corners as if expecting a phantom to emerge. Then, with a crack like a gunshot, every light in the room went out. Darkness swallowed the dining hall, absolute and oppressive. A chair scraped. Someone cursed softly. Poirot's senses sharpened, his mind racing to map the room, the table's edge beneath his fingers, the faint rustle of fabric to his left, the acrid scent of extinguished wicks. He counted the seconds 1, 2, 3, his heart steady, his ears straining for any telltale sound. Grayson. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the void. Sharp but controlled. The lights. Yes, my lady, came the butler's reply, calm as ever, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating toward the door. 5 seconds. 6. A faint clink, like glass touching glass. Poirot's mustache twitched. Someone was moving carefully, deliberately. 10 seconds. The lights flickered back to life, the chandelier blazing once more. Poirot's eyes darted around the room, cataloging each guest's position. Clara was half risen from her chair, her face pale, her hand still gripping her necklace. Sir Reginald sat rigid, his fists clenched on the table. Julian's head was bowed, his hands hidden beneath the tablecloth. Lady Eleanor stood by the mantelpiece, her expression unreadable. Mr. Grayson, back at his post, held a lit candelabrum, his face a mask of professional neutrality. An unfortunate interruption, Lady Eleanor said, her voice smooth, effuse. No doubt, blown by the storm. Grayson, please check the generator. Of course, my lady. The butler bowed and exited, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Poirot's gaze settled on the mantelpiece. The mahogany case was still there, its lock gleaming. But something was wrong, something infinitesimal, yet glaring to his meticulous eye. The case's lid was slightly ajar, a hair's breadth from being fully closed. Mon Dieu, he murmured, rising with a grace that belied his urgency. He crossed to the mantelpiece, his gloved fingers hovering over the case. The room fell silent, every eye on him. Monsieur Poirot. Lady Eleanor's tone was curious, but there was a steel beneath it. Is something amiss? He opened the case fully, revealing the black velvet interior. Empty. The ravenwood sapphire was gone. A collective gasp rose from the table. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Sir Reginald's chair scraped back as he stood, his face thunderous. Julian's eyes widened, his fingers twitching as if longing to sketch the scene. Lady Eleanor's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, her lips parting in what might have been shock or triumph. Impossible, Sir Reginald barked. The case was locked. We all saw it. A costly laugh, Sir Reginald muttered, his newspaper rustling. That gem's worth more than this manor. Julian, picking at his eggs, said nothing, his eyes fixed on a sketch pad where he'd drawn the sapphire's facets in obsessive detail. Poirot noted the smudge of blue paint on his cuff, a match for the thread. Lady Eleanor, Poirot said, stirring his tea, may I examine the dining hall once more? The scene of the crime holds many secrets. Of course, she replied, rising. I'll accompany you. The rest of you, please carry on. The dining hall was as they'd left it, the mahogany case still on the mantelpiece, its emptiness a silent accusation. Poirot circled the room, his eyes scanning every surface. The scuff mark remained, but the silk thread was gone. Someone had been here before him. He knelt by the table, peering beneath it. A glint caught his eye, a tiny shard of glass, no larger than a pinhead, embedded in the carpet. He extracted it with tweezers, holding it to the light. Crystal, not sapphire? A wine glass, perhaps, shattered in the dark. Curious, he murmured, pocketing the shard. He turned to Lady Eleanor, who watched him with an intensity that bordered on amusement. Madame, this case, has it ever been opened by another, besides yourself? Never, she said firmly. The key remains with me always. She touched her bracelet, the silver key glinting. And yet, Poirot said, the lock was picked, a delicate task, requiring skill and speed. Who among your guests possesses such talents? Her laughter was soft, almost mocking. You suspect my friends, Monsieur Poirot. They are many things vain, ambitious, secretive but thieves. I doubt it. Doubt is the enemy of truth, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. And truth, madame, is my only ally. He moved to the window, where the storm had left. A puddle on the sill, a faint smear of mud marked the frame fresh, with a trace of grass. Someone had opened the window, perhaps to create a draught that snuffed the candles. The blackout had been orchestrated, he was certain now, but by whom? As they returned to the breakfast room, Poirot's mind churned. The glass shard, the mud, the cipher in the sheet music, the missing thread, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. The sapphire was close, hidden in plain sight. And the thief, he suspected, was closer still. The day unfolded with a series of interviews, each guest summoned to the library where Poirot had set up his impromptu headquarters. The room was a labyrinth of bookshelves, its air heavy with the scent of leather and dust. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced like suspects in Poirot's mind. Clara was first, her poise faltering under his scrutiny. I don't know why you're bothering with me, she said, tossing her hair. I was at the table the whole time. Ask anyone. Yet your bracelet, mademoiselle, Poirot said, gesturing to the emerald. It draws the eye, a distraction, perhaps, for nimble fingers. Her laugh was sharp. Nimble fingers. I can barely sew a button. You're barking up the wrong tree, monsieur, and your debts. Poirot asked, his voice soft but piercing. The whispers of Monte Carlo, the losses at baccarat, they suggest a need for funds. Nong. Her face paled, her fingers twisting the bracelet. That's private and irrelevant. I didn't touch the sapphire. Poirot nodded, dismissing her. Her denial was vehement, but her fear was real. A motive, but no proof yet. Sir Reginald was next, his cane tapping impatiently. I've nothing to hide, he declared. I handled the case before dinner, as I said. Felt the weight of the sapphire. Solid piece, but I didn't take it. And your cane, Poirot said, eyeing the silver head. It is heavy, oui, perhaps heavy enough to shatter glass. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Glass, what's this nonsense? I was seated when the lights went out. Ask Grayson, he saw. Emmy. Indeed, Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. Merci. Sir Reginald. Julian entered last, his sketch pad clutched like a shield. I don't know what you want, he stammered. I only drew the sapphire. It's in my head, all the time. Your passion is admirable, Poirot said, flipping through the sketches. Each was a study of the gem, its facets rendered with eerie precision. But this paint, Monsieur Marchebleu, like the sapphire. It stains your cuff, your fingers, and perhaps a lock. Julian's eyes widened, his hands trembling. No, I wouldn't. I only wanted to capture it, to make it mine through art. Poirot patted his shoulder. Art is a noble pursuit, mon ami, but truth is nobler still. As Julian left, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The interviews had yielded little, but the guests' reactions were telling. Clara's defiance, Sir Reginald's bluster, Julian's panic, each was a piece of the puzzle, and Grayson, ever present yet invisible, remained the wild card. That evening, as the storm subsided, Poirot wandered the manor's halls, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rugs. The sapphire's absence gnawed at him, a challenge to his intellect. He paused by a portrait of Lord Ravenwood, Lady Eleanor's late husband, his stern gaze seeming to mock the detective's progress. A faint draft stirred the air, coming from behind the frame. Poirot pressed the panel, and it swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Mon Dieu, he whispered, stepping inside. The passage was damp, its walls lined with cobwebs. It led to the drawing room, emerging behind a tapestry. The blackout, the draft, the mud. Someone had used this passage to orchestrate the theft. Slipping in and out unseen, he emerged into the drawing room, where the guests were gathered for cards. Clara's laughter rang out, but her eyes were tired. Sir Reginald dealt the cards with military precision, his cane at his side. Julian sketched by the window, his pencil scratching furiously. Lady Eleanor watched from the sofa, her expression unreadable. Grayson poured sherry, his movements fluid as ever. Poirot's eyes met Lady Eleanor's, and he saw a flicker of recognition, of challenge. She knew he was close, but to what? The sapphire, or something deeper? As the clock struck 10, Poirot retired to his room, the ciphered sheet music in hand. He decoded it by lamplight, his heart racing. The message was simple: chandelier, midnight, a rendezvous, a trap, or the sapphire's hiding place. He glanced at his pocket watch, 11:50. The manor was silent, the storm a distant memory. Poirot donned his coat, his resolve firm. The truth awaited, and Hercule Poirot would meet it head-on. The drawing room was dark when Poirot entered, the chandelier's crystals glinting like stars. He lit a single candle, its flame casting long shadows. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second a heartbeat. A creak broke the silence, the passage opening. Poirot stepped back, his hand on his cane. A figure emerged, cloaked in shadow. Clara, her gown shimmering, her face pale but determined. She moved to the chandelier, standing on tiptoe to reach its base. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, stepping into the light. "The sapphire, I presume." Clara gasped, her hand freezing. "Monsieur Poirot." "I wasn't enough," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The game is over. The sapphire is there. We." Hidden in the chandelier's hollow base, during the blackout, tears welled in her eyes. "I had no choice," she whispered. "The debts, they'd ruined me. I only meant to borrow it, to sell it and replace it with a fake." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "Greed is a harsh master, mademoiselle, but truth is kinder." He retrieved the sapphire, its weight reassuring in his hand. Clara sank to her knees, sobbing. Poirot helped her up, his mind already turning to the next question. Why had Lady Eleanor allowed the theft to unfold? Was she, too, a player in this game? As he escorted Clara to her room, the manor seemed to sigh, its secrets unraveling. The sapphire was found, but the mystery was far from solved. And Hercule Poirot, his little gray cells alight, knew the true denouement was yet to come. "Yet the sapphire is no more," Poirot said softly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. He closed the case, his fingers lingering on the lock. "A theft, mes amis, executed in the span of 10 seconds, under our very noses." Clara's laugh was brittle. "A thief. Here, that's absurd. It must have been." Misplaced. Sir Reginald scoffed. "A gem like that doesn't vanish by accident, girl." Julian's voice was barely a whisper. "The curse." "Nonsense," Lady Eleanor snapped, her composure restored. "There is no curse, only human greed." "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you will uncover the truth." Poirot inclined his head, his gray eyes gleaming. "Rest assured, Lady Eleanor, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot are already at work. The sapphire has not left this room or, perhaps, this table." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each face a tapestry of suspicion and fear. Poirot returned to his seat, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The blackout had been no accident, the timing was too precise. The thief had known the manor's quirks, the generator's fragility. An inside job, perhaps, or a conspiracy among the guests. As coffee was served, Poirot began his silent interrogation, his eyes missing nothing. Clara's nervous habit of twisting her bracelet, the emerald in its center catching the light a distraction, or a clue. Sir Reginald's rigid posture, his left hand resting on his cane, its silver head engraved with a regimental crest had it been in his hand during the blackout. Julian's distracted air, his napkin crumpled into a shape resembling the sapphire's facets, was it artistic obsession or guilt? And Mr. Grayson, returning now with the report of a temporary fault in the generator, his alibi too convenient, his movements too precise. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the portraits on the walls, their stern faces seeming to judge the living. Poirot sipped his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding his thoughts. The sapphire's theft was not merely a crime of greed. It was a performance, a challenge laid at his feet, and Hercule Poirot never refused a challenge. The evening wore on, the guests retreating to the drawing-room for brandy and uneasy conversation. Poirot lingered in the dining hall, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the mahogany case. The lock was intact, its mechanism sophisticated yet not impervious. A skilled hand could have picked it in seconds, given the cover of darkness. But why leave the case ajar? Carelessness, or deliberate taunt? He examined the mantelpiece, noting a faint scuff mark on the marble shoe, perhaps brushing against it in haste. The mark was fresh, its edges sharp. Poirot crouched, his knees protesting, and peered beneath the mantle. A single sapphire blue thread, barely visible, clung to a splinter of wood. He plucked it with tweezers, holding it to the light. Silk, fine and expensive, Clara's gown, Lady Eleanor's shawl, or something else entirely. The drawing-room beckoned, its warm glow a contrast to the dining hall's chill. Poirot entered to find the guests scattered like chess pieces on a board. Clara by the fireplace, fanning herself with a peacock feather fan. Sir Reginald in an armchair, nursing a brandy. Julian sketching furiously in a leather-bound notebook. Lady Eleanor at the piano, her fingers coaxing a melancholic waltz from the keys. Mr. Grayson hovered near the door, a tray of crystal glasses in hand. Monsieur Poirot, Clara called, her voice bright but strained. Have you solved the mystery already? Or are we all suspects? Poirot smiled, his mustache curling. All are suspects, Mademoiselle Beaumont, until the truth reveals itself. But fear not, the little gray cells work tirelessly. Sir Reginald snorted. Suspects? Preposterous. I've faced worse accusations in the Punjab, and I'll be damned if I'm questioned over a bauble. Yet a bauble worth a king's ransom, Lady Eleanor said, her fingers pausing on the keys. And one that was in our care. Monsieur Poirot, what do you require of us? For now, only your patience, Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room, and perhaps a few answers. Tell me, who among you approached the mantelpiece this evening, before the lights failed? Silence fell, thick as the fog outside. Clara's fan stilled. Sir Reginald's glass paused halfway to his lips. Julian's pencil scratched to a halt. Lady Eleanor's eyes met Poirot's, a challenge in their depths. I did, Sir Reginald said at last, his voice gruff. Before dinner, when Eleanor showed us the case, admired the craftsmanship. Nothing more, and I, Julian added, his voice hesitant. I studied the sapphire's color. For my work, it's extraordinary, the way it shifts in the light. Clara laughed, a touch too loudly. Well, I stayed clear. Gems don't interest me, too cold, too heavy. I prefer emeralds. She touched her bracelet, the green stone winking. Poirot nodded, filing away their responses. Sir Reginald's admission was bold, perhaps too bold. Julian's obsession with the sapphire's hue was genuine, but was it a cover? Clara's deflection was practiced, her emerald a convenient distraction. And Lady Eleanor, silent on the matter. Why, Mr. Grayson approached, offering Poirot a glass of brandy. Sir, may I assist in your inquiries? The staff are at your disposal. Merci, Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, declining the drink. Tell me, Where were you when the lights went out? By the door, sir, preparing to clear the dessert plates. I moved to the generator room immediately after, and you saw nothing unusual. No movement, no sound. Grayson's eyes flickered. Almost imperceptibly? Nothing. Sir. The darkness was absolute. Poirot's smile was polite, but his mind raced. Grayson's alibi was airtight, yet his presence felt like a shadow cast too precisely. The butler knew the manor's secrets, its passages, its quirks. Had he exploited them? As the guests dispersed to their rooms, Poirot remained in the drawing room, pacing before the fireplace. The sapphire's theft was a puzzle with too many pieces: the blackout's timing, the case's lock, the scuff mark, the silk thread, and the guests each a study in contradiction. Clara's vivacity masked desperation. Sir Reginald's bluster hid curiosity. Julian's dreaminess concealed passion. Lady Eleanor's elegance veiled calculation. And Grayson, the enigma, moved like a ghost through it all. He paused by the piano, where Lady Eleanor's sheet music lay open. A faint pencil mark caught his eye, a series of dots and dashes, scribbled in the margin. Morse code, a cipher. He pocketed the sheet, his heart quickening. The sapphire was still in the manor. Of that, he was certain. The thief had not had time to escape, not in 10 seconds. But where was it hidden? And why steal it under such scrutiny? The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the manor. Poirot straightened, his resolve firm. The Ravenwood sapphire would not elude him. The game had begun, and Hercule Poirot was its master. The next morning, Poirot woke to the patter of rain against his window, the moors shrouded in mist. He dressed with his usual precision: black suit, polished shoes, a single white rose in his lapel, and descended to the breakfast room, where the guests were already assembled. The mood was tense, the clink of teacups the only sound breaking the silence. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor said, her smile serene. "I trust you slept well, despite our excitement." "Exceedingly well, merci," Poirot replied, taking his seat. The mind of Poirot rests only when the truth is near. Clara rolled her eyes, buttering a scone with unnecessary force. "Truth, I say it's a prank. Someone's having a laugh at our expense." Chapter 3. Whispers in the library. There in Ravenwood Manor's library was thick with the scent of aged leather and polished wood. A cavernous room where shadows danced across towering bookshelves under the flicker of a dozen brass candelabras. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the Persian rug, his keen eyes scanning the scene. The Ravenwood sapphire had vanished mere hours ago, and the weight of suspicion hung over the manor like a Yorkshire mist. The guests, still reeling from the blackout that cloaked the theft, had retired to their rooms, leaving Poirot to begin his investigation in solitude, or so he thought. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, the silk gleaming faintly in the candle light, and approached the display case where the sapphire had rested. It was an ornate piece, carved from ebony and inlaid with mother of pearl, its glass front unmarred by cracks or scratches. The lock, a delicate brass mechanism, showed no signs of tampering. Poirot's lips pursed as he crouched, his monocle catching the light as he examined the case's base. His gloved fingers traced a faint seam, barely perceptible, along the wooden panel. With a gentle press, a click echoed in the silent room, and a small compartment sprang open, revealing a velvet-lined hollow empty. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his mustache twitching. "An inside job, perhaps. The case, it hides its secrets, as well as the guests." He rose, brushing invisible dust from his tailored suit, and turned his attention to the library itself. The shelves stretched to the vaulted ceiling, each groaning under the weight of ancient tomes, their spines embossed with gold and silver. A spiral staircase led to a mezzanine, where a single candle burned, casting long shadows across a reading nook. Poirot's gaze lingered there, sensing the room held more than books. He began his circuit, his steps measured, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The library was not just a repository of knowledge, but a stage for secrets. the guest's lady. Eleanor's carefully curated ensemble had each displayed a flicker of unease during dinner. The reclusive artist, Julian Marsh, with his ink-stained fingers and haunted eyes. The sharp-tongued heiress, Clara Beaumont, whose laughter carried a brittle edge. The retired colonel, Sir Reginald Thorne, whose military bearing masked a restless energy, and the cryptic butler, Mr. Grayson, whose every movement was too precise, too rehearsed. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with the challenge. One of them, or perhaps more, had orchestrated the theft during those fleeting moments of darkness. As he scanned the shelves, a glint caught his eye, a sliver of paper wedged between two volumes of Historia Naturalis. He plucked it free, revealing a torn page, its edges jagged, as if ripped in haste. The text was in Latin, a passage about gemstones and their mystical properties, but what intrigued Poirot was the handwritten note scrawled in the margin, sub umbra, veritas, under the shadow, truth. The ink was fresh, the script hurried. He tucked the page into his pocket, his mind racing. A scholarly motive, or a deliberate clue to mislead. The creak of a floorboard snapped his attention to the mezzanine. He froze, his hand resting lightly on the staircase's iron railing. "Who is there?" he called, his voice calm but commanding. Silence answered, save for the faint rustle of fabric. Poirot ascended the spiral stairs, each step deliberate, his senses attuned to the library's whispers at the top. He found the reading nook empty, but the candle's flame flickered as if disturbed by a recent presence. A book lay open on the table, its pages marked with a ribbon. Poirot lifted it, noting the title, Arcana Gemarum, a rare treatise on cursed jewels. The ribbon marked a chapter on sapphires, with a single line underlined, "The stone sees all, and betrays those who covet it." Interesant, Poirot mused, his eyes narrowing. The library, it speaks, but in riddles. He descended, the book tucked under his arm, and returned to the display case. The hidden compartment suggested someone familiar with the manor's secrets, perhaps a member of the household. His thoughts turned to Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose impeccable service during dinner had been almost perfect. Poirot resolved to interview him, but first, he needed to understand the stage of the crime. He paced the room, reconstructing the blackout. It had lasted no more than 30 seconds, triggered when a candelabra was accidentally knocked over, plunging the drawing room into darkness. The guests had been scattered, some at the table, others near the case. The sapphire's disappearance was swift, precise. Only someone with intimate knowledge of the manor could have acted so decisively. A soft thud interrupted his thoughts, coming from a shadowed alcove near the fireplace. Poirot approached, his hand hovering near the concealed pocket where he kept a small revolver, a precaution he rarely admitted to carrying. The alcove held a reading chair and a low table, but nothing seemed amiss until he noticed a book on the floor, its cover embossed with the Ravenwood crest. He knelt to retrieve it, and as he did, a faint breeze brushed his cheek. His eyes darted to the wall behind the chair, where a panel stood slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. "Aha," Poirot whispered, his curiosity piqued. He pressed the panel, and it swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. The air within was cool, musty, carrying the scent of stone and time. A secret passage, how delightfully cliché, yet undeniably practical for a thief. Poirot stepped inside, his pocket torch casting a thin beam across rough-hewn walls. The passage sloped downward, twisting toward what he deduced was the drawing room. He followed it for a dozen paces before stopping at a dead end, a wooden panel with a latch. He pressed his ear to it, hearing muffled voices from the other side. "You promised it would be simple." The voice was sharp, feminine, unmistakably Clara Beaumont's. "If they find out, Julian, we're finished." "Keep your voice down," came a low, urgent reply. Julian Marsh, the artist. "No one saw us." The blackout was perfect. Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. An affair, perhaps, or a conspiracy. He eased the latch open, peering through a crack into the drawing room. Clara stood by the fireplace, her emerald gown catching the firelight, her face pale but defiant. Julian, disheveled in his bohemian scarf, gripped her arm, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "We stick to the plan," Julian whispered. "No one suspects us." "Not yet." Clara yanked her arm free. "And the sapphire, you said you'd handle it?" "I did," Julian hissed. "It's safe, but we need to be careful. That detective, he's not like the others. He sees things." Poirot closed the latch silently, retreating into the passage. His mind churned with possibilities. Clara and Julian were involved, but to what extent? Was the sapphire truly in their possession, or were they pawns in a larger game? He returned to the library, emerging from the alcove just as the door creaked open. Mr. Grayson entered, his silver tray gleaming with a single glass of brandy. "Monsieur Poirot," Grayson said, his voice smooth as polished marble, "I thought you might require refreshment. The night grows late." Poirot smiled, his eyes sharp. "Merci, Mr. Grayson, but I find the library's secrets far more invigorating. Tell me, how long have you served at Ravenwood Manor?" Grayson's expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly on the tray. 15 years, sir. Since Lady Eleanor's father was master of the house. And in all that time, Poirot continued, circling the butler like a cat toying with a mouse, you must have learned its every nook and cranny. Its hidden places, perhaps. Grayson's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his composure. "The manor is old, sir. It has its quirks, but I assure you, my duties keep me in plain sight." "Yes, sir," Poirot said, his tone deceptively light. "And during the blackout, you were, I presume, attending to the guests." "I was in the pantry, retrieving a bottle of port," Grayson replied, his voice steady. "The blackout caught us all by surprise," Poirot nodded, filing away the alibi for scrutiny. "And this library, does it hold any particular treasures?" "Rare books, perhaps." Grayson hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. "The collection is extensive, sir. Lady Eleanor's father was a scholar. Some volumes are quite valuable. Valuable enough," Poirot pressed, "to warrant a torn page. Or a theft to distract from another prize." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he bowed. "I wouldn't know. Sir, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to the other guests." As Grayson departed, Poirot's gaze returned to the torn page in his pocket. The Latin phrase nagged at him sub umbra veritas. He crossed to a massive oak desk, where a Latin dictionary lay among scattered papers. Flipping to the relevant entry, he confirmed his suspicion. The phrase suggested truth hidden in darkness, a fitting metaphor for the evening's events. But was it a clue left by the thief, or a taunt? The library door creaked again, and Sir Reginald Thorne entered, his military posture rigid despite the late hour. "Poirot," he said gruffly, "thought I'd find you here. Can't sleep with that blasted sapphire business hanging over us." Poirot turned, his expression genial but probing. "Colonel Thorne, your presence is most welcome. Tell me, you are a man of discipline. Did you notice anything unusual during the blackout?" Thorne's eyes narrowed, his mustache bristling. "Damned chaos, that's what. Everyone stumbling about, Clara shrieking like a banshee. I was near the case, mind you, checking its craftsmanship. Fine piece, that sapphire. You touched it?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but sharp. "Briefly," Thorne admitted. "Wanted to see if the cursed nonsense held any weight. Load of rot, if you ask me. And your whereabouts during those 30 seconds of darkness?" Poirot pressed, his eyes locked on Thorne's. "By the case, then back to my seat," Thorne said, his tone clipped. "Didn't wander off, if that's what you're implying." Poirot smiled thinly. "I imply nothing, Colonel. I merely seek the truth," Thorne grunted, retreating to a chair by the fire. Poirot watched him, noting the slight tremor in his hand as he lit a cigar. A man of precision, yet rattled. 5 unaccounted minutes, Poirot recalled, from the Colonel's earlier recounting. Time enough for mischief. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot returned to the display case, his torch illuminating the lock. A faint smudge of paint blue, vibrant, caught his eye. He recalled Julian's ink-stained fingers, but this was oil paint, not ink. A visit to the artist's studio was in order, but first, he needed to test Grayson's alibi. The pantry was adjacent to the drawing room, accessible via the main hall, but also, perhaps, via the secret passage. Poirot stepped back into the passage, his torch guiding him to the drawing room's hidden panel. He emerged silently, finding the room empty save for the dying embers in the fireplace. Clara and Julian were gone, their argument concluded. He crossed to the pantry door, testing its handle. Unlocked, as expected. Inside, shelves gleamed with crystal and silver, but no port bottle was in sight. Grayson's story wavered. Returning to the library, Poirot found a new clue, a single pearl earring, half hidden beneath a rug near the alcove. It was delicate, expensive. Clara's, no doubt, given her ostentatious jewelry at dinner. Had she been in the passage during the blackout, or later, during her argument with Julian? The pieces were aligning, but the puzzle was far from complete. The night deepened, and Poirot settled into a chair, the torn page and earring before him. The library's whispers grew louder, not of sound, but of secrets. Clara's desperation, Julian's obsession, Thorne's discrepancy, Grayson's composure, all threads in a tapestry of deceit. The sapphire was but the catalyst, Poirot sensed, for a deeper truth. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells weave the clues together, knowing the morning would bring fresh revelations. As the candle burned low, a final sound stirred him, a faint scratching from the mezzanine. He rose, torch in hand, and ascended once more. There, tucked behind a curtain, was a small notebook, its pages filled with sketches of the sapphire, each more frantic than the last. Julian's work, unmistakably, but the final page held a different image, a map of the manor, with the library and secret passage marked in red. Poirot's lips curved into a smile. The artist had been busy, but whether as thief or accomplice, only the next day would tell. The library fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock. Poirot pocketed the notebook, his mind alight with the thrill of the chase. The Ravenwood sapphire was out there, hidden in shadow, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to uncovering truth in the dark. Chapter 4. The Colonel's confession. Morning after the sapphire's disappearance cast a peculiar pall over Ravenwood Manor. The Yorkshire moors, shrouded in a damp mist, seemed to whisper secrets as Hercule Poirot stood by a tall window. In the drawing room, his sharp gray eyes scanning the room where the theft had occurred. The air was heavy with the scent of polished oak and lingering cigar smoke from the previous night's dinner. The guests, though absent now, had left an invisible residue of tension. Each glance, each gesture, etched into Poirot's meticulous mind. He adjusted his impeccable mustache, a ritual that steadied his thoughts, and turned to the locked display case, now empty of its glittering prize. The Ravenwood sapphire, a gem the size of a quail's egg, had vanished during a fleeting blackout, a moment when the manor's ancient wiring had faltered, plunging the room into darkness for no more than 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Poirot mused, was an eternity for a thief with a plan. The drawing room was a study in opulence, crimson velvet drapes, a chandelier dripping with crystal, and portraits of stern Ravenwood ancestors glaring from the walls. Yet, it was the display case that held Poirot's attention, a sturdy mahogany box with a glass lid, its lock untouched, no signs of tampering. The key, Lady Eleanor had confirmed, remained in her possession, locked in a safe upstairs. The thief, then, had been clever, precise, and bold. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the door. Sir Reginald Thorne, the retired colonel, entered, his posture rigid as if still marching to a military drum, his face, withered by years. In India and Africa, bore the lines of a man accustomed to command, yet, his eyes hazel, sharp, but flickering with unease, betrayed a crack in his disciplined facade. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice clipped, I trust you've made progress on this blasted sapphire business. Damned unsettling. All of it. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Progress, Sir Reginald, is a matter of observing the little details. The mind, it constructs a puzzle, and each piece must fit precisely. Tell me, what were you doing during the blackout last evening? The colonel's jaw tightened, but he met Poirot's gaze. I was seated at the dinner table, like everyone else. When the lights went out, I stayed put. No sense stumbling about in the dark. A most sensible choice, Poirot said, his tone smooth as silk. And yet, I wonder, did you perhaps admire the sapphire earlier in the evening? Lady Eleanor mentioned you took an interest. Sir Reginald's fingers twitched, a fleeting gesture Poirot noted. I did. Magnificent stone, craftsmanship like that flawless cut. Deep as the ocean reminds me of jewels I saw in Jaipur. I held it briefly, with Eleanor's permission, of course, but I put it back in its case. Locked it myself. Locked it yourself, Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. And you are certain of the time? Of course, the colonel snapped, then softened, around 8, before dinner. Eleanor showed it to me, then secured it. I didn't touch it after that. Poirot nodded, pacing slowly around the display case. The sapphire, it is a curious thing. Nong. A gem that inspires admiration, yet also greed. Tell me, Sir Reginald, did you notice anything unusual during the dinner? A guest out of place, perhaps, or a moment unaccounted for. The colonel hesitated, his gaze drifting to the chandelier. Can't say I did. Everyone was chatting, drinking. That artist fellow, Marsh, was prattling on about light and shadow. The heiress, Clara, was flirting with him. I think Grayson, the butler, was hovering as usual. Nothing stood out. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Nothing. You say, and yet, in a room full of eyes, a sapphire vanishes. Most curious. The colonel shifted, his polished boots scuffing the rug. Look, Poirot, I'll be straight with you. I know how these things look. A man like me, military background, knows his way around a lock or two. But I didn't take the damn thing. I've no need for it. My pension's modest, but I'm no thief. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming. Mon ami, I do not accuse. I merely seek the truth. And the truth, it is like a fine wine, it reveals itself with time and care. Permit me to ask, after the blackout, when the lights returned, where were you precisely? Sir Reginald frowned, his brow furrowing as if replaying the moment. I was standing by the table. I'd gotten up to stretch my legs just before the lights went out. Bad. You see, I was near the window when they came back on. Near the window, Poirot echoed, his voice soft but probing. And how long were you standing, Sir Reginald? A minute, 2, less than that, the colonel said quickly. I'd only just stood when the lights failed. Couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. Poirot's eyes gleamed. 30 seconds, the same duration as the blackout. Most interesting. He turned to the window, its heavy drapes framing a view of the moors. And you saw nothing, heard nothing. Not a thing, Sir Reginald said, but his voice carried a slight tremor. Just the usual chatter, then silence when the lights went out. Everyone was startled. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the colonel's words. The man's account was precise, almost too precise, as if rehearsed. And yet, there was that tremor, that fleeting crack in his composure. Poirot filed it away, a piece of the puzzle not yet placed. Thank you, Sir Reginald, Poirot said, his tone polite, but firm. You have been most helpful. I may have further questions, but for now, I shall continue my little investigation. The colonel gave a curt nod and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Poirot stood alone, his gaze returning to the display case. He crouched, inspecting the lock with a jeweler's precision, his fingers tracing the smooth brass. No scratches, no signs of force. The thief had been skilled or had access to the key. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint clink from the dining room, adjacent to the drawing room. Poirot moved silently, his polished shoes making no sound on the parquet floor. The dining room was still set from the previous night, its long mahogany table cluttered with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. One glass, near the head of the table, caught his eye. It bore a smudge of faint, oily mark on its rim, as if someone had pressed a finger against it. Poirot lifted the glass, holding it to the light. The smudge was distinct, a partial fingerprint, its ridges clear enough to suggest a man's hand. He smiled faintly. The little gray cells, they begin to dance, he murmured. He set the glass down and returned to the drawing room, his mind racing. The Colonel's account had a gap 5 minutes unaccounted for, by Poirot's estimation. Sir Reginald had claimed to be seated, then standing by the window, but the timing didn't align with the other guests' movements. Miss Clara Beaumont had been near the display case just before the blackout, flirting with Julian Marsh. The butler, Mr. Grayson, had been pouring wine, yet no one recalled seeing him during the blackout itself. And Lady Eleanor, where had she been when the lights failed? Poirot's investigation led him to the dining room's sideboard, where a decanter of port sat untouched. He noticed a faint scuff on the floor, barely visible, leading to a panel in the wall. He pressed it gently, and to his delight, it clicked open, revealing a narrow servant's passage. The passage was dusty, unused for years, but fresh footprints marked the floor, large, deliberate prints, like those of a man's boots. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. The plot, it thickens. He followed the passage, its walls lined with cobwebs, until it emerged behind a tapestry in the library. The library, where he'd found the torn page from a rare book, now took on new significance. The passage connected the dining room, the drawing room, and the library, a perfect route for a thief to move unseen during the blackout. Poirot returned to the drawing room, his mind piecing together the timeline. The Colonel had been near the window, he claimed, but the footprints suggested someone had used the passage. Could Sir Reginald, with his military precision, have slipped through the passage during the blackout? And if so, why? His pension, modest as he admitted, was no motive for theft, or was it? The day wore on, and Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor, finding her in the conservatory, tending to a collection of rare orchids. Her silver hair gleamed in the filtered light, her hand steady as she pruned a delicate bloom. Lady Eleanor, Poirot began, a question, if I may. The sapphire, when you showed it to Sir Reginald, did he handle it for long? She paused, her eyes sharp. Not long. A minute, perhaps. He seemed fascinated, almost reverent. Why do you ask? Poirot smiled enigmatically. A detective. He must ask many questions to find the one answer. Tell me, did you notice Sir Reginald during the blackout? Lady Eleanor frowned. I was near the fireplace, trying to calm Clara, who was startled. I don't recall where Reginald was. Why, do you suspect him? I suspect everyone, Madame, Poirot said lightly. It is my method. He left her to her orchids, his mind returning to the fingerprint. He needed to compare it, but the manner lacked the tools for a proper analysis. Instead, he relied on observation. The Colonel's hands, he recalled, were large, calloused from years of service. The smudge on the glass could belong to him or to another. As evening approached, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room for an impromptu discussion. The tension was palpable, each guest eyeing the others with suspicion. Clara Beaumont, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, fidgeted with her pearl necklace. Julian Marsh, the artist, leaned against a wall, his eyes distant, as if sketching the scene in his mind. Mr. Grayson stood by the door, his face impassive, while Lady Eleanor presided with a regal air. Ms. Amos, Poirot began, his voice commanding attention. The disappearance of the Ravenwood sapphire is a puzzle, but not an unsolvable one. I have observed, I have listened, and I have found inconsistencies. Sir Reginald, for example, tells me he was by the window during the blackout. Yet, I wonder, Could he have moved elsewhere in those 30 seconds? The colonel's face reddened. See here, Poirot, I've told you the truth. I didn't take the sapphire. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Sir Reginald. I do not accuse, but I question, and questions, they lead to truth. Another question. Then, who among you touched the wine glass at the head of the table last night? The guests exchanged glances, puzzled. Clara spoke first. I didn't. I was drinking champagne. Julian shrugged. Not me. I stick to water. Grayson's voice was steady. I poured the wine, sir, but I used a cloth to handle the glasses. No fingerprints from me. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And yet, a fingerprint remains, a clue, perhaps, to the one who moved in the dark. The colonel's hands clenched, and Poirot noted the gesture. Sir Reginald, he said softly, would you permit me to examine your hands? The room fell silent. Sir Reginald hesitated, then extended his hands. Poirot studied them, noting the calluses, the faint scars, a soldier's hands. He said, strong, precise, but tell me, Sir Reginald, why did you omit 5 minutes from your account of the evening? The colonel blinked, caught off guard. 5 minutes? I don't know what you mean. Before the blackout, Poirot pressed, you were not at the table for a time. Where were you? Sir Reginald's face hardened, but he sighed, his shoulders slumping. All right, Poirot, you've got me. I stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette. Needed air. My knee was acting up, and I didn't want to make a fuss. I was back before the lights went out. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. A cigarette, you say, and yet, no smell of tobacco on you last night. Most curious. The colonel's eyes widened, but before he could respond, a sharp cry echoed from the hall. The maid, a young woman named Lily, burst in, her face pale. Sir, I found something in the library, a glove, hidden behind a bookcase. Poirot's heart quickened. Show me, mademoiselle. The group followed Lily to the library, where she pointed to a narrow gap behind a towering bookcase. Poirot, with surprising agility, retrieved a single leather glove, black, well worn, and unmistakably a man's. He held it up, his eyes scanning the guests. This glove, he said, belongs to someone in this house, and it was placed here after the theft. Who among you claims it? No one spoke, but Poirot's gaze lingered on Sir Reginald, whose face had paled. The glove was large, fitting a man of his stature. Yet, Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. The glove could be a plant, a distraction. The real question was, who had access to the passage, and who had the motive to frame another? As night fell, Poirot retired to his room, his mind a whirlwind of clues. The fingerprint, the glove, the passage, the colonel's missing 5 minutes, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. He sat at a small desk, sketching a timeline on a notepad, his precise handwriting mapping the evening's events. The colonel's confession, though partial, was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions than answers. Why lie about the terrace, and why no trace of tobacco? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Julian Marsh stood at the door, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, I need to speak with you. It's about Clara. I think she's hiding something. Poirot gestured for him to enter. Speak. Monsieur Marsh, the truth, it is a delicate flower, but it blooms in the light. Julian hesitated, then whispered, I saw her in the library last night, after dinner. She was looking at that book, the one with the torn page. She didn't see me, but I think she knows more than she's letting on. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, Monsieur Marsh? What were you doing in the library? Julian flushed. I was sketching. The light in there, it's perfect for capturing shadows. But I swear, I didn't touch the sapphire. Poirot nodded, dismissing him. The artist's words added a new layer to the mystery. Clara, the heiress with debts, in the library with the torn book. The colonel, with his missing minutes and a glove that might be his. And Grayson, the butler, whose absence during the blackout was to convenient dot as Poirot lay in bed, the Manor's eerie silence broken only by the distant howl of the wind. He felt the puzzle shifting. The sapphire was still in the Manor. He was certain, and the thief, whether the colonel or another, had made a fatal mistake. The fingerprint on the glass, the glove, the passage, all were threads in a tapestry Poirot would unravel. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would set a trap. A cunning move, worthy of Hercule Poirot, to catch a thief in the act. The chapter closed with the detective's eyes gleaming in the dark, his mind alight with the thrill of the chase, and the promise of a revelation that would shake Ravenwood Manor to its core. Chapter 5. The heiress's gambith air in Ravenwood Manor hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the polished oak floors. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour. The fire crackled in the grand hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the guests, each of whom seemed to guard a secret as fiercely as they guarded their expressions. The Ravenwood sapphire, that cursed gem of legend, had vanished 2 nights ago during a fleeting blackout, and the Manor's inhabitants were unraveling under the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. The morning after the colonel's confession, Poirot found himself drawn to Miss Clara Beaumont, the sharp-tongued heiress, whose emerald eyes sparkled with a mix of defiance and desperation. Clara had spent breakfast deflecting questions with barbed wit, her laughter a little too bright, her gestures a touch too theatrical. Poirot, ever observant, noted the way her fingers trembled when she lifted her teacup, the way her gaze darted to the artist, Julian Marsh, before settling on her plate. There was a story there, one Poirot intended to unravel. He began his day in the Manor's rose garden, where the air was crisp with the scent of dew and the first frost. Clara was there, pacing along the gravel path, her fur-trimmed coat sweeping the ground like a queen's train. She stopped when she saw Poirot, her lips curling into a practiced smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth as silk, but edged with steel. "Have you come to accuse me of stealing the sapphire? Or are you simply admiring the roses?" Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar blend of curiosity and certainty. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, the roses are charming, but it is the thorns that interest me. They prick, gnaw, and yet they protect. Tell me, what is it you protect so fiercely?" Clara's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You speak in riddles, monsieur. I'm merely here to clear my head. This Manor feels like a gilded cage." "Oui, a cage," Poirot agreed, stepping closer, his polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel, "but one you have chosen to enter. Why, I wonder. The Ravenwood sapphire is a prize, but it is not the only treasure here, is it?" Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might bolt. Instead, she tossed her head, her auburn curls catching the weak morning light. "You're fishing, Monsieur Poirot. If you have an accusation, make it, not an accusation, mademoiselle, an observation. You accuse Monsieur Marsh of desperation, yet your own heart beats with a certain urgency. Perhaps it is not the sapphire you seek, but something it could buy." Clara's laughter was sharp, almost brittle. "You think I stole it to pawn it? Oh, that's rich. I'm an heiress, monsieur. I don't need to steal." "Need? Perhaps not," Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding. "But want, that is another matter. The little gray cells, they whisper to me of debts, mademoiselle. Debts that weigh heavier than the sapphire itself." Her face paled, and Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. He pressed on, his tone gentle but probing. "The gambling tables, they are unkind, are they not? Monte Carlo, perhaps, or the private salons of London. A lady of your station, she plays, she loses, and yet she must maintain the facade of wealth." Clara's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white against the dark fur of her coat. "You know nothing of my life," she hissed. "Nothing? Then enlighten me," Poirot said, spreading his hands. Tell me why a woman of your intelligence would accuse an artist of theft when her own secrets are so precarious. She turned away, her breath visible in the chilly air. For a moment, Poirot thought she would refuse to answer, but then she spoke, her voice low and bitter. You're right about the debts. My father's fortune ain't what it was. The estates, the investments, they're crumbling. I've been keeping up appearances, but the creditors are circling. If you must know, I thought Julian might have taken the sapphire. He's broke, you know. His paintings don't sell anymore. He's obsessed with that gem, sketching it like it's his salvation. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And yet, mademoiselle, you do not strike me as one who accuses without evidence. What do you know of Monsieur Marsh that you have not shared? Clara hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. I found this in my room last night, she said, thrusting it toward him. It was slipped under my door. Poirot unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the elegant, looping script. It read, Meet me at midnight. The sapphire is ours. J. The letters were followed by a curious symbol, a spiral bisected by a jagged line, like a lightning bolt trapped in a whirlpool. Poirot's mustache twitched as he recognized the symbol. It matched one he had seen on the torn page from the library's rare book. This J. Poirot said, holding the note aloft. You believe it to be Monsieur Marsh. Who else? Clara snapped. He's been lurking around, muttering about the sapphire's aura. He's unhinged. Monsieur Poirot. I wouldn't put it past him to try something desperate. Poirot folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. And yet, mademoiselle, you did not bring this to me immediately. While Clara's eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, or calculation, I wanted to be sure. I didn't want to ruin an innocent man. Very noble, Poirot said, his tone dry. But the little gray cells, they suggest another motive. Perhaps you wish to use this note to your advantage, to shift suspicion, or to gain something from Monsieur Marsh. She glared at him, but her defiance was crumbling. You're insufferable, she muttered. Fine, I thought I could confront Julian, get him to confess. If he had the sapphire, I could persuade him to share it. Split the profits. Poirot's eyes gleamed, and so, the heiress plays her gambit. But tell me, mademoiselle, where were you during the blackout? Your absence was noted. Clara's lips parted, then closed. She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. I was in the powder room, fixing my hair. The lights went out, and I stayed put until they came back on. Ask anyone. I shall, Poirot said. But the powder room, it is near the drawing room, non, close enough to hear the commotion, to see. Or to act. You're impossible, Clara said, turning on her heel. I'm done answering your questions. Poirot watched her stalk back toward the manor, her coat swirling like a storm cloud. He did not follow. Instead, he turned his attention to the note, his fingers tracing the spiral symbol. It was no coincidence it linked Clara, the library, and the sapphire in a web of intrigue. But was Clara the spider, or merely a fly caught in someone else's trap? The afternoon found Poirot in the manor's east wing, where Clara's suite overlooked the moors. With Lady Eleanor's permission, he searched her room, his movements meticulous as he examined every drawer, every seam. The room was a study in opulent silk drapes, a four-poster bed, a vanity cluttered with perfumes and powders. But Poirot's eyes were drawn to a small writing desk, its surface marred by a faint scratch, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. He opened the desk's drawer and found a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Clara's elegant handwriting. Most entries were mundane social engagements, dress fittings, but one caught his eye, dated a week before the gathering. The debts are suffocating. Mr. V says I have until month's end. The sapphire could be my way out, but I'd need a partner. J is reckless, but he knows the manor's secrets. Could I trust him? Poirot's mustache twitched. J again. Julian Marsh, or someone else. He closed the journal and continued his search, his fingers brushing against the underside of the desk. There, taped to the wood, was a small envelope. Inside was another note, this one in a different hand, blocky, precise, almost mechanical. It read, "The spiral leads to the truth. Check the chandelier." Poirot's heart quickened. The chandelier in the drawing room, where the sapphire had been displayed, was a baroque monstrosity, dripping with crystals that caught the light like 1,000 tiny stars. Could the sapphire be hidden there, in plain sight, and who had left this note for Clara, the same J who wrote the first, or another player in this game? He pocketed the note and left the room, his mind racing. The spiral symbol, the chandelier, Clara's debts, it was a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit the pieces together. But first, he needed to test Clara's story. He sought out the maid, Emily, a nervous girl with wide eyes and a habit of twisting her apron when questioned. "Mademoiselle Emily," Poirot said, his voice soothing, "you were in the drawing room during the blackout, oui? Did you see Mademoiselle Beaumont?" Emily hesitated, her fingers knotting the fabric. I don't know, sir. It was dark, and everyone was moving about. I think I saw her near the powder room earlier, but I can't be sure, and during the blackout itself." Poirot pressed. Emily shook her head. "I was fetching more wine from the cellar. I didn't see her." Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. Clara's alibi was shaky, but not yet disproven. He needed more, something concrete to tie her to the theft, or to exonerate her and point to the true culprit. That evening, Poirot orchestrated a subtle experiment. He gathered the guests in the drawing room, where the empty display case stood, like a silent accusation. Lady Eleanor, regal in black velvet, presided over the group, her eyes sharp despite her feigned weariness. The Colonel, Sir Reginald, polished his monocle with a handkerchief, his posture rigid. Julian Marsh slouched in a corner, his sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the sapphire. Mr. Grayson, the butler, moved silently among them, refilling glasses with a precision that bordered on eerie. Poirot stood before the chandelier, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice commanding attention, "the Ravenwood sapphire has not left this manor. It is here, hidden by a mind most cunning. But the little gray cells, they do not rest. They see, they observe, they deduce." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Clara sat near the fire, her fingers toying with a pearl necklace, her expression unreadable. Julian's pencil stopped moving, his gaze fixed on Poirot. The Colonel coughed, a sound that seemed more nervous than necessary. Poirot continued, "Tonight, I propose a toast to truth. But before we drink, I must ask, who among you knows the spiral?" The room went still. Clara's fingers froze on her necklace. Julian's pencil snapped in half. The Colonel's monocle slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Only Grayson remained impassive, his face a mask of professionalism. "The spiral," Lady Eleanor repeated, her brow furrowing. "What nonsense is this, Monsieur Poirot?" "Not nonsense, madame," Poirot said, producing the note from Clara's room. "A symbol, found in a book, on a note, and perhaps, in the heart of this mystery, it leads us to the chandelier." He stepped forward, his hand brushing the chandelier's lowest crystal. The guests watched, breathless, as he twisted the crystal, revealing a small compartment within. A gasp rippled through the room, but the compartment was empty. Clara's laugh broke the silence, sharp and mocking. "A fine trick, Monsieur Poirot. But it seems your little gray cells have led you astray." Poirot smiled, unruffled. "Have they, mademoiselle? Or have they led me exactly where I wish to go?" He turned to Grayson, who had moved closer, his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Grayson, you are most attentive. Tell me, did you polish this chandelier before the dinner?" Grayson nodded, his voice steady. "Of course, sir. It's my duty to ensure the manor is impeccable. And yet," Poirot said, holding up a cloth he had found near the chandelier, "this cloth bears traces of paint, the same paint, I believe, found on Monsieur March's hands. Curious, non, Julian lurched to his feet, his face pale. That's absurd. I haven't touched the chandelier. Perhaps not, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving Grayson. But someone has. Someone who knew the spiral, who knew the chandelier's secret. Clara stood, her voice trembling with anger. This is ridiculous. You are accusing everyone and no one. Monsieur Poirot. If you have proof, show it. Poirot's smile widened. Patience, mademoiselle. The proof. It comes. But first, I must ask you to return to your room. There is something I wish to examine. Clara hesitated, then stormed out, her heels clicking on the floor. Poirot watched her go, his mind already piecing together the next move. The note, the chandelier, the paint, it was all connected, but the true mastermind remained elusive. Clara was desperate. Yes, but was she cunning enough to orchestrate the theft? Or was she, like the others, a pawn in a larger game? The night deepened, and Poirot returned to Clara's room, this time with Lady Eleanor's permission to conduct a more thorough search. He found the journal again, but now a new entry caught his eye, written in haste. He knows too much. The spiral is dangerous. I can't let him ruin everything. Poirot's heart quickened. He could be Julian, Grayson, or even the Colonel, but it could also be Poirot himself. He searched further, his fingers probing the seams of Clara's traveling trunk. There, hidden in a false bottom, was a small velvet pouch. Inside was not the sapphire, but a single crystal from the chandelier, its surface etched with the spiral symbol. Poirot sat back, his mind racing. The crystal was a message, a clue left by someone who wanted Clara to take the fall. But who? Julian, with his obsessive sketches, Grayson, with his jeweler's loupe and knowledge of the manor's secrets, or Lady Eleanor herself, whose invitation had set this drama in motion. He returned to the drawing-room, where the guests were still gathered, their nerves frayed. Clara had returned, her face pale but composed. Poirot held up the crystal, its spiral glinting in the firelight. This, he said, is the key, not to the sapphire, but to the truth. Mademoiselle Beaumont, you have been played. This crystal was placed in your trunk to incriminate you. But the little gray cells, they see beyond the deception. Clara's eyes widened, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't take it. I swear, I believe you, Poirot said, surprising her. But you know more than you have told. The note, the debts, the spiral, what are you hiding? Clara sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. I thought I could outsmart them, she said, her voice breaking. Julian and I, we talked about taking the sapphire, selling it to pay my debts. But it was just talk. I didn't do it. Someone else did, and they're using me to cover their tracks. Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Julian looked away, his hands trembling. Grayson stood motionless, his face unreadable. The Colonel cleared his throat, his monocle back in place. Lady Eleanor watched, her expression a mix of curiosity and amusement. The game is not over, Poirot said, his voice slow and resolute. But the net tightens. The sapphire is close, and the truth closer still. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered by the chandelier, his fingers brushing the empty compartment. The spiral, the notes, the debts, it was a tapestry of deceit, and Clara was only one thread. The true thief, he knew, was watching, waiting for his next move, and Poirot, with his cunning and his little gray cells, was ready to make it. Chapter 6. The artist's secret. Morning sun pierced through the heavy drapes of Ravenwood Manor, casting long, golden fingers across the polished oak floors of the dining room. Hercule Poirot sat at the breakfast table, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly over a pristine napkin, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. The other guests, however, bore the weight of the previous night's tension. The theft of the Ravenwood sapphire had cast a pall over the gathering, and the air buzzed with unspoken accusations. Poirot's gray eyes, sharp as a falcon's, darted from face to face, cataloguing every twitch, every averted glance. Julian Marsh, the reclusive artist, sat at the far end of the table, his fork hovering over a barely touched plate of eggs. His gaunt face, framed by a mop of unruly chestnut hair, seemed paler than usual, his eyes sunken as if he'd wrestled with nightmares. Across from him, Miss Clara Beaumont, the sharp-tongued heiress, sipped her tea with exaggerated calm, though her fingers trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. Sir Reginald Thorne, the retired colonel, buttered his toast with military precision, his jaw set as if preparing for battle. Lady Eleanor Ravenwood presided over the table, her regal poise unshaken, though her gaze lingered on Poirot, as if daring him to unravel her secrets. The butler, Mr. Grayson, glided silently around the room, refilling cups with a practiced grace that Poirot found almost a perfect. Ms. Amos, Poirot began, his voice soft yet commanding. The theft of the sapphire is a puzzle most intriguing. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot does not rest until every piece is in its place. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This morning, I shall continue my inquiries. I trust you will all cooperate. A murmur of assent rippled through the room, though Julian's fork clattered against his plate, drawing Poirot's attention. The artist muttered an apology, his voice barely audible, and resumed staring at his food. Poirot's lips twitched beneath his mustache. A nervous man, this Monsieur Marsh, but is it guilt or fear that stirs him? After breakfast, Poirot made his way to the East Wing, where Julian's temporary studio had been set up at Lady Eleanor's insistence. The room was a cavern of light and shadow, its tall windows admitting a flood of daylight that illuminated a chaos of canvases, paint tubes, and sketchbooks strewn across tables. The air smelled of turpentine and linseed oil, a sharp contrast to the manor's otherwise floral ambience. Julian stood before an easel, his back to Poirot, dabbing at a canvas with a brush that trembled in his hand. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot said, closing the door with a soft click. I would have a word with you, if I may. Julian stiffened, his brush pausing mid-stroke. He turned, his eyes wary, like a deer sensing a predator. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. What do you want to know? Poirot's smile was disarming, almost paternal. You are an artist of great talent, I am told. Lady Eleanor speaks highly of your work. Yet, you seem troubled. Perhaps the loss of the sapphire weighs heavily on you. Julian's laugh was brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. Troubled? Who wouldn't be? A cursed gem stolen, under our noses, and now we're all suspects in your little game. Not a game, monsieur, Poirot corrected gently, stepping closer to examine a sketch on the table. It depicted the Ravenwood sapphire, rendered in meticulous detail every facet, every glint of light captured with an almost obsessive precision. This is remarkable work. You have studied the sapphire closely. Non. Julian's cheeks flushed. It's inspiring. The way it catches the light, the depth of its color. I couldn't help but draw it. Couldn't help it, indeed, Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the edge of another sketch, this one showing the sapphire cradled in a skeletal hand, the image unsettlingly macabre. You have a fascination with this gem. Tell me, did this fascination lead you to touch it? Perhaps, during the blackout. Julian's eyes widened, and he took a step back, knocking over a jar of brushes. They clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Touch it. No. I was in the drawing room with everyone else when the lights went out. I didn't go near the case. Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. Calm yourself, monsieur. I merely ask to understand. You see, I have found evidence. He paused, watching Julian's reaction. The artist's breath hitched, and his fingers twitched as if longing to grasp something or hide it. There is paint, Monsieur Marsh, on the lock of the display case. A smudge of ultramarine blue, precisely the shade I see on your palette. Julian's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his gaze darting to the canvas behind him. Poirot followed his eyes and noticed a large cloth draped over something in the corner of the room. With deliberate slowness, Poirot approached it, his polished shoes clicking on the floor. "May I?" Poirot asked, his hand hovering over the cloth. Julian lunged forward, his voice rising. "It's nothing, just an old painting, not finished." But Poirot, with a swift, graceful motion, pulled the cloth away. Beneath it was a canvas unlike any other in the room. It depicted the Ravenwood sapphire, not as a mere jewel, but as the centerpiece of a surreal, almost nightmarish scene. A shadowy figure, cloaked in black, held the gem aloft, its light casting eerie reflections on a twisted, barren landscape. The detail was astonishing, the brushwork feverish, as if the artist had poured his soul into every stroke. Poirot turned to Julian, his voice soft but unyielding. "This is no ordinary sketch, monsieur. This is a confession of the heart. Tell me, what does this painting mean to you?" Julian sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. For a long moment, he was silent, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "It's not what you think. I didn't steal the sapphire. But I've done something else. Something I've carried for years." Poirot sat across from him, his posture impeccable, his eyes never leaving Julian's face. "Confide in Hercule Poirot, monsieur. The truth, it is the only path to freedom." Julian's shoulders slumped, and he began to speak, his words halting at first, then tumbling out like a river breaking through a dam. 5 years ago, I was in Paris, desperate for money. My paintings weren't selling, and I was reckless. I met a man, a dealer in antiquities. He offered me a job forging a painting, a lost Caravaggio. I didn't ask questions. I needed the money. So I did it. I painted a fake, and he sold it for a fortune. I thought it was over. But he kept coming back, threatening to expose me unless I did more. Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing, letting Julian continue. "When I came to Ravenwood, I thought I could escape it all. Start fresh, but then I saw the sapphire, and it consumed me. I sketched it obsessively, not because I wanted to steal it, but because it felt like a symbol of everything I'd lost: purity, truth, my art, that painting." He gestured to the canvas. "It's my guilt, my fear of being found out." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "And this dealer, monsieur, does he know you are here?" Julian shook his head. "No, I cut ties with him last year. But the guilt, it follows me. When the sapphire was stolen, I panicked. I thought maybe he'd found me, that this was his way of dragging me back." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Julian's confession was compelling, but it did not explain the paint on the lock. Nor did it account for the artist's nervous demeanor during breakfast. There was more to uncover, and Poirot suspected it lay in the details Julian had not yet shared. "Merci, Monsieur Marsh," Poirot said, rising. "Your candor is noted. But I must ask you to remain here while I continue my inquiries. The sapphire, it is still missing, and the truth, it is not yet fully revealed." As Poirot left the studio, he paused in the hallway, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The paint smudge was a clue, but not a definitive one. Julian's confession, while revealing, was a distraction, a side mystery that, while intriguing, did not directly solve the theft. Yet the painting, with its haunting imagery, suggested a mind tormented by secrets. Could Julian have acted in a moment of impulse, or was he protecting someone else? Poirot's next stop was the drawing room where the theft had occurred. The display case stood empty, its glass gleaming mockingly in the sunlight. He knelt beside it, examining the lock once more. The ultramarine smudge was faint but unmistakable, and beside it, he noticed something new, a tiny scratch, barely visible, as if the lock had been tampered with by an amateur. Curio, Poirot thought. The thief was skilled enough to act in the dark, yet clumsy enough to leave a mark. He stood, dusting off his trousers, and surveyed the room. The chandelier above caught his eye, its crystal sparkling like miniature sapphires. A memory flickered Clara Beaumont's nervous glance toward the ceiling during dinner. Poirot filed it away, his mind already turning to the next thread in the tapestry. As he exited the drawing room, he nearly collided with Mr. Grayson, who was carrying a silver tray with a single glass of brandy. The butler's face was a mask of composure, but Poirot noticed a slight tightening of his jaw. "Pardon, Monsieur Poirot," Grayson said, stepping aside. "I was bringing this to Sir Reginald. He requested it, at this hour." Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, most unusual for a military man. "Non," Grayson's smile was thin. "Sir Reginald has his habits, monsieur." Poirot nodded, letting the butler pass, but his mind was alert. Grayson's presence at every key moment: the dinner, the blackout, the morning's service was too convenient. And the jeweler's loop Poirot had glimpsed in the butler's quarters during a discreet search suggested a knowledge of gems that went beyond a servant's duties. By midday, Poirot had gathered the guests in the library for a brief update, a tactic to observe their interactions. He stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, and addressed them with his usual theatrical flair. "Mesdames et messieurs, the net tightens. I have found clues: a smudge of paint, a scratch on a lock, a confession of past sins, but the sapphire, it remains elusive. I ask you now, if any of you have knowledge you have not shared, speak. The truth, it cannot hide forever." Clara's eyes darted to Julian, who stared at the floor. Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his face reddening, while Lady Eleanor's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. Grayson, standing by the door, was as still as a statue, but Poirot caught the briefest flicker of unease in his eyes. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on the torn page from the rare book, still resting on a side table. He picked it up, tracing the jagged edge. The text was in Latin, a passage about betrayal and redemption, but what caught his attention was a faint pencil mark in the margin, a sketch of a spiral, identical to one in Julian's notebook. "Mon Dieu," Poirot thought, his heart quickening. "The artist and the book are linked, but how?" He resolved to confront Julian again, this time with the torn page in hand. As he made his way back to the studio, the manor seemed to pulse with secrets. Each room a stage for deception. The sapphire was more than a gem, it was a catalyst, exposing the hidden truths of Ravenwood's guests. In the studio, Julian was pacing, his hands tangled in his hair. He froze when he saw Poirot, the torn page dangling from the detective's fingers. "Monsieur Marsh," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "this page, it comes from the library, and this spiral, it matches your sketches. Explain." Julian's eyes widened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might bolt. But then the artist's shoulders sagged, and he sank onto a stool, his voice trembling. I tore it out, not because of the sapphire, but because of what it said. The passage, it reminded me of my past, of the forgery. I couldn't bear to see it." Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And yet, you left it near the display case, a careless act, or a deliberate one?" "Careless," Julian insisted, his voice cracking. "I swear, I didn't take the sapphire. I was in the library that night, after dinner, before the blackout. I tore the page, and I must have dropped it." Poirot nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The timeline was tightening. Julian had been in the library before the theft, near the display case, the paint smudge, the torn page, the scratch on the lock all pointed to him, yet his confession of a past crime felt too neatly disconnected from the present. Poirot's instincts screamed that there was another layer, a deeper motive. As the afternoon waned, Poirot took a solitary walk through Ravenwood's gardens, the misty Yorkshire air cooling his thoughts. The sapphire was still in the manor, he was certain of it, but the true puzzle was not just who had taken it, but why. Julian's obsession, Clara's debts, Sir Reginald's discrepancy, Grayson's expertise, Lady Eleanor's cryptic hints, each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. By evening, Poirot returned to the studio one last time, determined to test a theory. He found Julian hunched over a new sketch, this one of a woman's face, her eyes strikingly similar to Clara's. Poirot's heart quickened. The affair between the artist and the heiress, overheard in the library, was more than a scandal. It was a motive. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence, you have told me of your past, but not of your heart. You and Mademoiselle Beaumont, you are close. Non. Close enough, perhaps, to protect her. Julian's pencil snapped in his hand. He looked up, his eyes wild with fear. What are you saying? I am saying, Poirot continued, stepping closer, that love, it can make a man do desperate things. If Mademoiselle Beaumont took the sapphire, would you shield her? Would you leave a trail of paint, a torn page, to draw suspicion to yourself? Julian's mouth opened, but no words came. He stood, trembling, and Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. The chapter closed with Julian's silence, a confession in itself, leaving Poirot to ponder whether the artist was a pawn or a player in this intricate game. The sapphire remained hidden, but the truth was closer than ever, lurking in the shadows of Ravenwood Manor. Chapter 7. The curse unveiled there in Ravenwood Manor hung heavy with secrets, the kind that clung to the walls like the ivy outside, whispering through the cracks of the ancient estate. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably trimmed and his eyes sharp as a hawk's, stood in the drawing-room, where the Ravenwood sapphire's absence loomed like an uninvited guest. The previous night's blackout had shifted the atmosphere, turning polite smiles into wary glances among the eclectic gathering. Lady Eleanor Ravenwood, the enigmatic hostess, Julian Marsh, the brooding artist, Miss Clara Beaumont, the sharp-tongued heiress, Sir Reginald Thorne, the retired colonel, and Mr. Grayson, the butler whose composure seemed a fortress unto itself. Each guest, Poirot noted, wore their suspicions, like a second skin, and the manor itself seemed to pulse with unease. The morning after the theft, a fog had settled over the Yorkshire moors, shrouding Ravenwood Manor in a ghostly veil. Poirot, ever the early riser, had taken to pacing the drawing-room, his polished shoes clicking softly against the parquet floor. The empty display case, its lock untouched yet violated, stood as a silent accusation. Lady Eleanor had shared the sapphire's grim legend at dinner, a gem cursed to bring betrayal to its owners, passed down through generations of Ravenwoods, each meeting some form of treachery. Poirot, a man of reason, dismissed such tales as fanciful, but the guests' reactions, Clara's nervous laugh, Julian's haunted stare, the colonel's gruff dismissal suggested the curse held weight in their minds. As breakfast was served in the dining hall, the clink of porcelain and silverware did little to mask the tension. Poirot observed the guests over his coffee, noting how Clara avoided Julian's gaze, how Sir Reginald's fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the table, and how Grayson moved with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Lady Eleanor, regal, in a velvet gown, presided over the meal with an air of detached amusement, as if she knew more than she let on. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice smooth as the claret in her glass, have you made progress in unraveling our little mystery? Poirot inclined his head, his gray eyes gleaming. The little gray cells, they are at work, Lady Eleanor. A theft in a locked room, during a blackout no less, is a puzzle most intriguing. But rest assured, the truth, it will reveal itself. Clara, her auburn curls catching the chandelier's light, scoffed, a curse doesn't need a thief. Monsieur Poirot, perhaps the sapphire simply vanished. Her tone was playful, but her eyes darted to the empty chair where Julian usually sat. The artist had excused himself, claiming a need to sketch in solitude. Sir Reginald, his mustache bristling, set down his fork with a clatter. Nonsense, Miss Beaumont, curses are for fools and storytellers. Someone in this room has sticky fingers, and I'll wager it's not the first time. Grayson, pouring tea with a steady hand, remained silent, but Poirot caught the faintest tightening of his jaw. The butler's alibi overseeing the staff in the kitchen during the blackout was airtight. Yet Poirot's instincts whispered, "Of hidden depths, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, turning to the butler. "You have served the Ravenwood family for many years, Nong. Tell me, have you ever heard tales of this curse beyond what Lady Eleanor shared?" Grayson's eyes met Poirot's, unblinking. "The sapphire's history is well known, sir. Betrayal follows it, or so the stories go. I concern myself with facts, not folklore." His voice was flat, but Poirot sensed a guarded edge, like a man choosing his words as carefully as he polished the silver. The meal ended abruptly when a low, eerie moan echoed through the manor, a sound that seemed to rise from the very stones. Clara gasped, her teacup rattling in its saucer. Sir Reginald's hand went to his side, as if reaching for a phantom saber. Lady Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow, while Grayson excused himself to investigate the disturbance. Poirot, ever alert, noted the timing. A distraction, perhaps, or something more sinister. Determined to explore the manor's secrets, Poirot ventured to the drawing-room where the blackout had occurred. The room was a study in opulence, velvet drapes, a roaring fireplace, and walls lined with portraits of stern Ravenwood ancestors. The display case, a mahogany and glass relic, stood in the corner, its lock gleaming mockingly. Poirot examined it closely, his fingers tracing the edges. The lock was intact, the glass unmarred, yet the sapphire was gone. A conjurer's trick, he mused, or the work of someone intimately familiar with the case. As he knelt to inspect the base, a faint draft brushed his cheek. Curious, Poirot pressed his hand against the panel behind the case. It gave way with a soft click, revealing a narrow passage barely wide enough for a man. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light, and a musty scent wafted out, hinting at long disuse. Poirot's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the manor. It keeps its secrets well, but not from Hercule Poirot." He followed the passage, his steps cautious on the uneven stone. It wound behind the drawing-room, emerging behind a tapestry in the grand hall. The passage was a relic of the manor's history, likely used by servants or smugglers in centuries past. Its existence explained how the thief could have moved unseen during the blackout, but it raised a new question: who knew of its existence? Lady Eleanor, certainly, as the manor's mistress. Grayson, perhaps, given his long service, but the guess? Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Returning to the drawing-room, he found Sir Reginald pacing, his face flushed with agitation. "Monsieur Poirot, this place is cursed, I tell you. That noise, it's no wind or creaking beam. Something's amiss here." The colonel's bluster was genuine, but Poirot noted his eyes lingered on the display case, as if drawn to the scene of the crime. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his tone mild but probing, "you were in this room during the blackout, were you not? Tell me, what did you hear? What did you feel?" In those moments of darkness, the colonel straightened, his military bearing returning. "I was by the fireplace, discussing the war with Lady Eleanor. When the lights went out, I stayed put, didn't want to stumble like a fool. Heard a rustle, like fabric moving, and then that blasted moan. Thought it was the wind, but now—" He trailed off, his brow furrowing. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. "And your position?" "It was far from the display case." "Quite far," Sir Reginald replied, too quickly. "I'd no reason to be near it." But Poirot's memory was sharp. The colonel had admitted to handling the sapphire earlier, admiring its craftsmanship. 5 unaccounted minutes in his timeline nagged at Poirot's mind. Could the colonel, with his precise habits, have slipped into the passage during the blackout? His curiosity about the gem was evident, but was it mere admiration or something more? That evening, as the guests gathered for drinks, the manor's unease grew palpable. The eerie moans continued, sporadic but chilling, and Clara's attempts at witty banter fell flat. Julian returned, his hands stained with charcoal, his eyes distant. Poirot watched him closely, noting how he avoided the display case, as if it repelled him. Lady Eleanor, meanwhile, seemed to revel in the tension, her laughter a touch too bright. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, raising a glass, "you must share your theories. Surely you've unraveled something by now." Poirot smiled, his demeanor unruffled. "Theories, Lady Eleanor, are like the stars, many shine, but only one guides the way. I am close, but the truth, it requires a delicate touch." As the evening wore on, Poirot orchestrated a subtle test. He mentioned, in passing, that he'd found a clue in the passage a lie, but one designed to provoke. Sir Reginald's face paled, and he excused himself abruptly, claiming fatigue. Grayson, clearing glasses, paused for a fraction too long. Clara and Julian exchanged a glance, but it was the Colonel's reaction that lingered in Poirot's mind. Late that night, Poirot returned to the passage, a lantern in hand. The stone walls were damp, etched with faint carvings, initials, dates, fragments of a forgotten history. At the passage's end, he found a small alcove, barely visible in the gloom. Inside lay a single glove, black leather, its stitching frayed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The glove was too large for Clara or Lady Eleanor, too fine for a servant. It belonged to a man, and its presence in the passage was no accident. The next morning, Poirot confronted Sir Reginald in the library, where the Colonel was leafing through a volume on military history. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, holding up the glove, "this was found in a place most curious. A passage, hidden behind the drawing room. You know of it, perhaps?" The Colonel's face reddened, his mustache quivering. "I have no idea what you mean, Poirot. A glove could belong to anyone, but not to anyone who was where they claimed to be," Poirot replied, his voice soft but unyielding. "You said you remained by the fireplace during the blackout. Yet this glove, it tells a different story. You explored the passage, did you not?" Sir Reginald's shoulders sagged, his bluster fading. "All right, Poirot, you caught me. I found the passage by accident, earlier that day, when I leaned against the panel. During the blackout, I couldn't resist. I wanted to see where it led, but I swear, I didn't take the sapphire." Poirot studied him, his gray cells humming. The Colonel's curiosity was plausible, but his lie about his whereabouts was damning. Had he stumbled upon the passage by chance, or was he part of a larger scheme? The glove, the moans, the blackout, all were threads in a tapestry Poirot was determined to unravel. As he left the library, the eerie moan echoed again, louder this time, followed by a sharp cry from Clara's room. Poirot hurried upstairs, finding the heiress pale and trembling, pointing to a shadow on her balcony. "It moved," she gasped. Someone was there. Poirot stepped onto the balcony, the fog thick around him, a faint scrape. On the railing caught his eye a mark left by a tool, perhaps, or a boot. The manor's secrets were closing in, and Poirot knew the truth was near. The curse, if it existed, was not supernatural but human, woven from greed, deception, and betrayal. And Hercule Poirot, with his cunning and his little gray cells, was ready to unveil it. Chapter 8. The butler's game. The air in Ravenwood Manor hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clings to the walls like damp moss and seeps into every conversation. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap, his mustache impeccably trimmed, and his eyes, those sharp, green-gray eyes, scanning the room like a hawk circling prey. The sapphire was still missing, and the guests, now 3 days into their stay, were fraying at the edges. The Colonel's bluster had dulled to a grumble, the heiress's wit had turned brittle, and the artist's brooding had taken on a desperate edge. Even Lady Eleanor, with her regal poise, seemed to falter under the weight of her own secrets. But it was the butler, Mr. Grayson, who held Poirot's attention now. Grayson, with his polished shoes, his measured words, and his alibi so flawless, it was practically a work of art. Poirot leaned back in the velvet-upholstered armchair, the fire crackling in the hearth casting long shadows across the room. The other guests had retired to their quarters after another tense dinner, but Poirot had lingered, requesting a private word with the butler. Grayson stood near the doorway, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. The man was a study in restraint, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but Poirot knew better than to trust a mask. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot began, his voice soft but deliberate, each word chosen with the precision of a jeweler cutting a gem, "you have been most cooperative in this affair of the sapphire. Your account of the evening of the theft it is, how do you say, parfait?" "To parfait, perhaps." Grayson's lips twitched, the faintest crack in his composure. "I'm not sure I follow, Mr. Poirot. I've told you all I know." "Oui, and that is precisely the problem," Poirot said, tilting his head. "You know too much, and yet you reveal so little. A man of your experience, serving a household such as this, does not merely observe. You anticipate, you prepare, and yet, during the blackout, when the sapphire vanished, you claim to have been in the pantry, polishing silver, alone, unseen. It is convenient. Nong." Grayson's eyes narrowed, but he maintained his calm. "It's my duty to ensure the manner runs smoothly. Sir, polishing silver is hardly a crime." "Nong, it is not," Poirot agreed, rising from his chair with a fluid grace that belied his compact frame. He paced slowly toward the fireplace, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. "But a man who polishes silver during a blackout, when the house is plunged into darkness and chaos, such a man is either remarkably dedicated or remarkably clever." "I am inclined to believe the latter." Grayson said nothing, but Poirot caught the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed behind his back. The butler was no fool. He knew he was being circled. "Let us consider the facts," Poirot continued, turning to face Grayson. "The sapphire was taken from a locked display case, a case with no signs of forced entry. The blackout lasted precisely 2 minutes and 17 seconds, ample time for a skilled hand, but only if that hand knew exactly where to strike. The hidden compartment in the case, which I discovered in the library, suggests someone familiar with the manor's secrets. And you, Monsieur Grayson, have served the Ravenwood family for, what is it, 15 years?" 17, Grayson corrected, his voice steady but clipped. 17, Poirot echoed, his eyes gleaming. "A long time to learn the creaks of every floorboard, the quirks of every lock, the secrets of every guest. Tell me, Monsieur Grayson, what did you see during those 2 minutes of darkness? Or, perhaps the better question is, what did you do?" Grayson's composure held, but Poirot sensed a ripple of unease beneath the surface. The butler shifted his weight, ever so slightly, from one foot to the other. "I was in the pantry, as I said. I heard the commotion when the lights went out, but I remained where I was. It's not my place to interfere with the guests." "Interfere? Nong, Nong, you misunderstand," Poirot said, waving a hand dismissively. "I do not accuse you of interference. I accuse you of orchestration. A man such as you does not stand idle by while a theft unfolds. You are the conductor of this manor's symphony, are you not? Every tray, every glass, every moment is under your command, and yet you expect me, Hercule Poirot, to believe you were polishing silver while a priceless gem vanished under your nose." The fire snapped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Grayson's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to Poirot. "I'm a servant, Mr. Poirot, not a detective. If you have evidence, I suggest you present it." Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. "Evidence? Oui, it is a curious thing, evidence. Sometimes it is a fingerprint, a thread, a drop of blood. Other times, it is the absence of something, a reaction, a glance, a truth. You, Monsieur Grayson, have given me nothing to grasp, and that, in itself, is a clue." Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but a soft knock at the door interrupted him. It was Elsie, the young maid, her face pale and her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "Begging your pardon, sir," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard you talking about the blackout, and, well, I thought you should know. Poirot's eyes lit up, his attention shifting to the girl. Speak, Mademoiselle Elsie. What is it you thought I should know? Elsie glanced at Grayson, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. Mr. Grayson wasn't in the pantry during the blackout, sir. I was fetching a tray from the kitchen, and I passed the pantry door. It was open, and the light was on, but he wasn't there. Grayson's face remained impassive, but Poirot caught the briefest flash of something anger, perhaps, or panic in his eyes. Is that so? Poirot said, his tone light but laced with steel. And where, pray tell, was Monsieur Grayson? I don't know, sir, Elsie stammered. But I saw him later, coming from the east wing, near the drawing room. He looked flustered, like he'd been hurrying. Thank you, mademoiselle, Poirot said, dismissing her with a gentle nod. You have been most helpful. Elsie bobbed a curtsy and fled, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Poirot turned back to Grayson, his smile gone. The east wing, Monsieur Grayson, near the drawing room, where the sapphire was displayed. How curious. Grayson's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing a flicker of defiance. The girl is mistaken. She's young, easily confused. The blackout caused chaos, and she likely misjudged the timing. Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice deceptively mild. But the mind of Hercule Poirot is not so easily confused. Let us take a walk, you and I, to your quarters. Perhaps. I am curious to see where a man such as you spends his private moments. Grayson hesitated, then inclined his head. As you wish, sir. The manor's corridors were a labyrinth of shadows, the flickering gas lamps casting eerie patterns on the walls. Poirot followed Grayson through the servants' wing, noting the butler's measured steps, the way he avoided meeting Poirot's gaze. They reached a small, unassuming door at the end of a narrow hallway, and Grayson unlocked it with a key from his pocket. The room was Spartan but meticulous, a reflection of its occupant. A single bed, neatly made, stood against one wall. A small desk held a stack of ledgers, a fountain pen, and a photograph of a woman in a silver frame, Grayson's late wife. Perhaps, though Poirot made no comment, a wardrobe in the corner was the only other furniture, its doors closed tight. May I? Poirot asked, gesturing toward the wardrobe. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You'll find nothing of interest. Poirot opened the wardrobe, revealing a row of pressed uniforms and polished shoes. He ran his fingers along the shelves, his touch light but purposeful, until they brushed against something tucked behind. A folded shirt. He pulled out a small, leather-bound case, its surface worn but well kept. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a jeweler's loupe. Poirot held it up, catching the light. A curious tool for a butler? Nong. Unless, of course, you have a particular interest in gems. Grayson's face was unreadable. It belonged to my father. He was a jeweler. A keepsake. Nothing more. A keepsake, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. And yet, it is so conveniently placed, ready for use. Tell me, Monsieur Grayson, have you ever examined the Ravenwood sapphire with this loupe? Perhaps to assess its value, its flaws. I've never touched the sapphire, Grayson said, his voice firm. My duties are to the household, not to Lady Eleanor's trinkets. Trinkets, Poirot mused, closing the case with a soft click, a strange word for a gem worth a fortune. But let us play a little game, you and I, a game of truth. I will place this loupe on the desk, and I will tell you that I have found the sapphire hidden, perhaps, in this very room. What will you do, Monsieur Grayson? Will you protest? Will you search? Or will you betray yourself with a single, unguarded glance? Grayson's eyes locked onto Poirot's, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Then, slowly, deliberately, Grayson stepped back. You're mistaken, Mr. Poirot. There's no sapphire here. Poirot smiled, a predator's smile, we shall see. The next morning, the manor buzzed with a new energy, as if the walls themselves sensed the tightening noose. Poirot had not slept his mind, he often said, required no rest when a puzzle was at hand. He had spent the night piecing together the fragments, Elsie's testimony, the jeweler's loop, the hidden passage behind the drawing-room. But it was the butler's reaction or lack thereof that intrigued him most. Grayson's calm was not the innocence of a clear conscience. It was the calculated stillness of a man who knew the game was not yet overdone. At breakfast, Poirot announced his plan to the guests, his voice carrying a theatrical flourish that commanded attention. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, standing at the head of the dining table, the sapphire remains elusive, but not for long. Today, I shall conduct a thorough search of the manor, with the assistance of our esteemed butler, Monsieur Grayson. If the gem is here, we shall find it. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Clara Beaumont, the heiress, toyed with her necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. Julian Marsh, the artist, stared into his coffee, his expression unreadable. Colonel Thorne cleared his throat, his mustache bristling. About time, Poirot. This nonsense has gone on long enough. Lady Eleanor, seated at the table's other end, raised an eyebrow. I trust you'll be discreet, Mr. Poirot. My guests deserve their privacy. Of course, madame, Poirot said, bowing slightly, but the truth, it has no regard for privacy. The search began in the drawing-room, where the sapphire had last been seen. Poirot examined the display case again, his fingers tracing the edges of the hidden compartment. The lock, he noted, was a marvel of craftsmanship, intricate, but not impervious. A skilled hand, with the right tools, could have opened it in seconds. He glanced at Grayson, who stood nearby, overseeing the servants as they dusted and rearranged furniture under Poirot's watchful eye. Tell me, Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, his tone conversational, do you ever lock the drawing-room at night? Of course, Grayson replied. It's standard procedure when valuables are on display. And yet, the sapphire vanished, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving the butler's face. From a locked case, in a locked room, during a blackout. A remarkable feat. Non, Grayson met his gaze. Thieves are resourceful, Mr. Poirot. Indeed, Poirot said, turning back to the case, but so am I. The search continued through the morning, moving from the drawing-room to the library, then to the guest quarters. Poirot was meticulous, checking under rugs, behind paintings, inside vases. The guests followed at a distance, their unease palpable. Clara whispered something to Julian, who shook his head sharply. Colonel Thorne muttered about the indignity of it all. Lady Eleanor watched in silence, her expression unreadable. It was in the conservatory, among the ferns and orchids, that Poirot found his next clue. Hidden beneath a potted plant was a small, folded piece of cloth, stained with a faint trace of oil. Poirot held it up, sniffing it delicately. Machine oil, he murmured. The kind used to lubricate a lock. Perhaps. Grayson, standing nearby, said nothing, but his posture stiffened. Poirot tucked the cloth into his pocket and continued the search, his mind racing. The oil suggested preparation, precision, a plan executed with care, and Grayson, with his access to every corner of the manor, was perfectly positioned to execute such a plan. By midday, Poirot had searched every public room and was ready to return to Grayson's quarters. This time, he brought Colonel Thorne and Clara along, claiming their presence would ensure fairness. Grayson protested, but Poirot waved him off. Transparency, Monsieur Grayson, it is the foundation of trust. In the butler's room, Poirot went straight to the wardrobe, pulling out the leather case with the jeweler's loop. He held it up, letting it catch the light. A keepsake, you said, but perhaps it is more. Perhaps it is a tool, used to examine a gem before it is hidden or sold. Grayson's face darkened. You're grasping at straws, Mr. Poirot. Am I? Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding. He turned to the desk, where the ledgers were neatly stacked. He opened one, flipping through pages of meticulous handwriting lists of supplies, schedules, expenses, but one page caught his eye, series of numbers, written in a different hand, tucked into the margin. Interesting, Poirot said, holding the ledger up. These numbers 135, 246, 379, they are not expenses, non. They resemble a combination, perhaps for a safe. Or a code, for a rendezvous. Grayson's eyes flicked to the ledger, then away. I keep many records, Mr. Poirot. Those could be. Anything. Could be, Poirot agreed. But they are not. They are specific. And they are significant. Clara, standing near the door, shifted uncomfortably. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice sharp. Why are we wasting time on the butler when Julian's the one with paint all over his hands? Julian bristled, but Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. The truth reveals itself in layers, like an onion, and we are peeling back. A most intriguing layer now. Poirot closed the ledger and turned to Grayson. One last question, monsieur. During the blackout, when you were not in the pantry, where did you go? And do not tell me the East Wing. Elsie's testimony places you there after the blackout. Where were you when the lights went out? Grayson's silence was deafening. For the first time, his composure cracked, his hands clenching at his sides. I have nothing more to say, he said finally, his voice low. Then I shall speak. For you, Poirot said, his tone triumphant. You were in the drawing room, Monsieur Grayson. You knew of the hidden passage, the one behind the fireplace. You used the blackout to slip inside, to open the case with a tool lubricated with oil, to take the sapphire, and you hid it not in your room. Non, for you are too clever for that, but somewhere close. Somewhere you could retrieve it when the time was right. Grayson's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with something Poirot couldn't quite name. Defiance, perhaps, or resignation. Prove it, he said quietly. Poirot smiled. Oh, I shall. That evening, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room for what he called a little experiment. The fire was lit, the curtains drawn, and the tension in the room was as thick as the fog outside. Poirot stood before the display case, now empty, and held up a small, glittering object of fake sapphire, crafted from glass, but convincing enough to fool an untrained eye. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice commanding the room, I have found the Ravenwood sapphire. It was hidden, as I suspected, in a place both clever and audacious. Allow me to demonstrate. He placed the fake gem in the display case, locked it, and stepped back. Now, let us recreate the moment of the theft. A blackout, a moment of chaos, and a thief who moves with precision. Monsieur Grayson, would you be so kind as to extinguish the lights? Grayson hesitated, then moved to the wall, where a panel controlled the manor's electric lights. He flipped the switch, plunging the room into darkness. The guests gasped, their voices overlapping in a chorus of confusion. Stay calm. Poirot's voice cut through the noise. Observe, and listen. In the darkness, there was a faint creak, a shuffle of footsteps, and then silence. When the lights returned, Poirot was standing by the display case, the fake sapphire still in place, but Grayson was no longer at the panel. He stood near the fireplace, his face pale, his hands trembling. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You moved. Monsieur Grayson, in the darkness, you went to the fireplace. To the hidden passage, perhaps, to check on something you left there. Grayson's lips parted, but no words came. The other guests stared, their suspicion now fixed on the butler. Clara's eyes widened, Julian's jaw tightened, and Colonel Thorne muttered something about damned insolence. Poirot stepped forward, his voice low but resonant. The sapphire is still in this manor, hidden by a hand that knows its secrets. And you, Monsieur Grayson, have betrayed yourself. The passage behind the fireplace, shall we explore it together? Grayson's shoulders slumped, just for a moment, before he straightened. You're wrong, Mr. Poirot, but do what you must. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Oh, I shall, monsieur, I shall." Chapter 9. The double bluff there in Ravenwood Manor was thick with suspicion, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to the heavy velvet curtains and seep into the polished oak floors. The grand drawing-room, where the guests had gathered, once more at Hercule Poirot's request, flickered in the glow of candlelight. The chandelier above, a glittering cascade of crystal, caught the light and threw it back in sharp, fractured beams, as if mirroring the fractured trust among those assembled. The Ravenwood sapphire's theft had unraveled the thin veneer of civility, and now, as the clock struck 9, Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, meticulous frame commanding attention with an effortless authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished glass, "tonight we shall unmask the truth. The Ravenwood sapphire, this gem of legend and curse, has not left these walls. No, it remains among us, hidden by one whose cunning has been matched only by their audacity." His mustache twitched slightly, a telltale sign of his relish for the moment. The guests shifted uneasily. Miss Clara Beaumont, the heiress, sat ramrod straight, her emerald gown catching the light as her fingers toyed nervously with a pearl bracelet. Julian Marsh, the artist, slouched in an armchair, his dark eyes darting between Poirot and the others, a sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest. Sir Reginald Thorne, the retired colonel, stood near the fireplace, his military bearing betrayed by the faint tremor in his hand as he gripped his cane. Mr. Grayson, the butler, hovered near the door, his expression inscrutable as ever, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Lady Eleanor Ravenwood herself sat at the head of the room, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier, her gaze serene yet impenetrable, as if she were watching a play unfold rather than participating in it. Poirot raised a small velvet box, its edges worn but its presence commanding. "This," he said, opening it to reveal a gleaming blue gem, "is the Ravenwood sapphire. Or so you are meant to believe." A collective gasp rippled through the room, though Poirot's sharp eyes noted the nuances in each reaction. Clara's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly, Julian's lips curled into a faint smirk, Sir Reginald's brow furrowed, and Grayson's fingers twitched at his side. "But this," Poirot continued, closing the box with a snap, "is a mere facsimile? A clever imitation, crafted to provoke the guilty. The true sapphire remains hidden, and the one who knows its location is among us now." Clara's voice cut through the silence, sharp and brittle. "This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. You've dragged us here to play parlor games while the real thief escapes." Her indignation was convincing, but Poirot noted the slight quiver in her tone, the way her eyes avoided his. "Patience, Mademoiselle Beaumont," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. "The truth, like a fine wine, requires time to breathe. Let us consider the events of that fateful evening, the blackout, the locked case, the hidden passage. Each clue has pointed us closer to the culprit, and tonight we shall see the final piece fall into place." He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "The blackout was no accident. It was orchestrated to create chaos, a moment of darkness to conceal the theft. But who among you had the opportunity? Who had the motive? And who," he paused, his eyes sweeping the room, "had the audacity to believe they could outwit Hercule Poirot?" Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "I've had enough of this theatrics, Poirot. If you've got evidence, out with it. I've nothing to hide." His tone was defiant, but Poirot caught the way his hand tightened on his cane, the knuckles whitening. "Very well, Colonel," Poirot said, stopping before the fireplace. "Let us speak of evidence. The smudged fingerprint on the wine glass, yours, I believe, from when you admired the sapphire earlier that evening. Yet you claim to have been in the dining room during the blackout. A curious discrepancy." "No." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "I told you I was curious about the gem. I touched it earlier, that's all. I was nowhere near that case when." "The lights went out," Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point. Perhaps. But let us turn to Mademoiselle Beaumont. He pivoted to face Clara, whose composure faltered for a fraction of a second. Your gambling debts, mademoiselle, are no secret. A sum of £20,000, I believe, owed to a rather unsavory gentleman in London. The sapphire would fetch a handsome price, would it not? Clara's laugh was sharp, almost manic. You think I'd risk my reputation for a cursed rock? I'm not that desperate, Monsieur Poirot. But her eyes darted to the chandelier, a fleeting glance that Poirot did not miss. And you, Monsieur Marsh, Poirot continued, turning to the artist. Your obsession with the sapphire is well documented in your sketches. Paint smudges matching those on the display case's lock were found in your studio. A curious coincidence. Non, Julian's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. I told you, I sketched it for inspiration. I'm an artist, not a thief. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. And then there is Mr. Grayson, the ever-loyal butler, whose alibi is as polished as the silver he tends. Yet a jeweler's loop in your quarters suggests a knowledge of gems far beyond your station. And your absence during the blackout, confirmed by the maid, places you near the scene of the crime. Grayson's face remained impassive, but his voice was low and steady. I serve Lady Eleanor. Monsieur Poirot, I have no interest in her sapphire, real or cursed. Lady Eleanor herself spoke then, her voice calm and measured. Monsieur Poirot, you spun a fine tale, but surely you don't suspect my loyal staff, or are you suggesting I myself orchestrated this farce? Her smile was enigmatic, a challenge wrapped in courtesy. Poirot's eyes twinkled. All in good time, my lady, but first, let us test the waters. He clapped his hands, and the room plunged into darkness. A collective gasp filled the air, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and a muffled cry. The lights flickered back on within seconds, revealing Clara standing beneath the chandelier, her hand outstretched, a small velvet pouch clutched in her fingers. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. Mademoiselle Beaumont, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, you have played your hand. Clara's lips trembled, and the pouch slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft thud on the floor. I didn't mean to, she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. I needed the money. The debts, they were going to ruin me. I thought if I could just take it, sell it quietly. Poirot stepped forward, retrieving the pouch. He opened it, revealing the Ravenwood sapphire, or so it appeared. Another imitation, he said softly, holding it up to the light. The real sapphire, I suspect, is still hidden. But your actions, mademoiselle, have revealed your guilt. Clara sank into a chair, her sobs echoing in the room. Julian moved to comfort her, but Poirot's sharp gesture stopped him. Not yet, Monsieur Marsh. There is more to this tale. He turned to the group, his expression grave. The theft was a carefully orchestrated game, but not by Mademoiselle Beaumont alone. She was a pawn, driven by desperation, manipulated by another's cunning. The true sapphire remains in this manner, and the one who orchestrated this drama is watching us now. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests like a fog. Lady Eleanor's serene expression faltered for the briefest moment, but it was enough for Poirot to notice. He smiled, a small, triumphant curve of his lips. Let us rewind, he said, pacing once more. The blackout was no accident, but neither was it merely a cover for theft. It was a test, a carefully staged moment to observe your reactions. The hidden passage, the torn book, the coded no tall pieces of a puzzle designed to reveal your secrets. And you, my friends, have played your parts admirably. Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. What are you saying, Poirot, that this was all a setup? Precisement, Poirot replied. But the question remains, who set the stage? Who knew enough about each of you, your debts, your obsessions, your curiosities to weave this web? He stopped before Lady Eleanor, his gaze piercing. My lady, you invited me here for a delicate matter, yet you have remained curiously silent, observing as your guests unravel. Why, Lady Eleanor's smile was unwavering. I merely wish to protect my family's legacy. Monsieur Poirot, the sapphire's curse has haunted us for generations. I trusted you to uncover the truth. Poirot nodded, but his eyes gleamed with purpose. And so I have. But the truth is not what you expected. The sapphire was never the prize, it was the bait. You, my lady, orchestrated this theft to expose the weaknesses of those around you. But in doing so, you revealed your own. The room erupted in murmurs, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. The real sapphire, I suspect, is still in your possession. Hidden, perhaps, in the locket you wear so proudly. Shall we see? Lady Eleanor's hand instinctively touched the locket at her throat, and for the first time, her composure cracked. Monsieur Poirot, you go too far. Non, my lady, Poirot said, stepping closer. I go only as far as the truth demands. Open the locket, s'il vous plaît. The guests held their breath as Lady Eleanor hesitated, then slowly unclasped the locket. Inside, nestled against a velvet lining, was the ravenwood sapphire, its deep blue facets catching the candle light. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by stunned silence. Poirot turned to the guests, his voice calm but commanding. The theft was a ruse, a double bluff to reveal your secrets. Mademoiselle Beaumont's desperation, Monsieur March's obsession, Colonel Thorne's curiosity, and Mr. Grayson's loyalty all were tested, but the true mastermind was Lady Eleanor, who used the sapphire to uncover the truths you hid. Clara's sobs quieted, replaced by a steely resolve. You used me, she said, her voice trembling with anger. You knew about my debts, didn't you? You let me think I could take it. Lady Eleanor's expression softened, but she did not deny it. I needed to know who I could trust, Clara. The sapphire's curse is not in its stone, but in the greed it inspires. Poirot shook his head, his tone gentle but firm. The curse, my lady, is in the manipulation of others. You have played a dangerous game, and while I admire your cunning, I cannot condone it. He turned to the guests, his voice rising. The sapphire is safe, the thief revealed, and the conspiracy unmasked. But let this be a lesson. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise to the surface when Hercule Poirot is present. As the guests absorbed his words, the manor seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating like mist in the morning sun. Clara wiped her tears. Julian set down his sketchbook. Sir Reginald leaned heavily on his cane, and Grayson bowed slightly, his loyalty unshaken. Lady Eleanor closed the locket, her expression unreadable. Poirot adjusted his tie, a small smile playing on his lips. And now, Miss Amos, I believe it is time for a drink. The night is still young, and the truth, she is a thirsty mistress. Chapter 10. Poirot's cunning moved. Morning mist clung to the Yorkshire moors like a reluctant guest, shrouding Ravenwood Manor in a ghostly veil. Inside, the grand dining hall buzzed with an uneasy anticipation as Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small, precise frame commanding the room with an air of quiet authority. The guests Lady Eleanor Ravenwood, Miss Clara Beaumont, Julian Marsh, Sir Reginald Thorne, and Mr. Grayson sat in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of suppressed emotions, guilt, defiance, curiosity, and dread. The air was thick with the scent of polished oak and the faint tang of last night's wine, but no one touched the silver coffee pots or the delicate porcelain cups set before them. All eyes were on Poirot, who adjusted his mustache with a deliberate flick, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had unraveled a puzzle no one else could see. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant, cutting through the tension like a well-aimed dart. We have arrived at the moment of truth. The Ravenwood sapphire, that glittering emblem of mystery, has led us through a labyrinth of deception. But now, the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot have brought clarity to the shadows. The thief is among us, And so is the mastermind who wove this intricate game. A collective breath caught in the room. Clara's fingers tightened around her napkin, her knuckles white as bone. Julian's dark eyes flickered toward the window, as if seeking escape in the moors beyond. Sir Reginald sat ramrod straight, his military bearing betraying a faint tremor in his hands. Grayson, the butler, stood by the sideboard, his face an unreadable mask, though his eyes darted to Lady Eleanor, who sat with regal composure, her silver hair catching the light like a crown. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes tapping a rhythm on the hardwood floor. "Let us begin with the theft itself," he said, his French accent lending a theatrical cadence to his words. The sapphire vanished during a blackout, a moment of darkness that was no accident. The hidden passage behind the drawing room, discovered by Poirot, was used to spirit the gem away. "Miss Beaumont, you confess to retrieving the sapphire from the chandelier, driven by debts that gnawed at your pride like a rat at a rope. But, mademoiselle, your confession, while heartfelt, is only a piece of the puzzle." Clara's cheeks flushed, but she held her tongue, her eyes darting to the others as if expecting an accusation to leap from their lips. Poirot continued, undeterred. "The sapphire, we now know, was never truly stolen. It rests, even now, in a place most unexpected. But before I reveal its hiding place, let us consider the motives and machinations that brought us here." He turned to Sir Reginald, whose mustache twitched as if offended by the scrutiny. "Colonel Thorne, your tale of admiring the sapphire was convincing, yet your 5 unaccounted minutes during the blackout intrigued me. You explored the hidden passage, not to steal, but to satisfy a soldier's curiosity about the manor's secrets. Your candor about your actions was admirable, but it served another purpose to distract from the true orchestrator." Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "I have nothing to hide, Poirot. I wandered where I shouldn't have, but I didn't touch the blasted gem." "Precisement," Poirot said, raising a finger. "Your honesty, while genuine, was anticipated. Someone knew you would explore, just as they knew Miss Beaumont's debts would drive her to desperation." Julian Marsh shifted in his seat, his artist's hands fidgeting with a silver spoon. "What are you implying?" "Poirot, I've admitted my obsession with the sapphire's beauty, but I didn't steal it. My sketches prove my devotion was to art, not theft." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Monsieur Marsh, your canvases are indeed remarkable, capturing the sapphire's fire with an almost supernatural precision. But the paint smudges on the display case's lock suggested you were closer to the crime than you claimed. Your confession of a past misdeed forging a painting to save your career was a clever diversion, but it only deepened the mystery. You, too, were a pawn in a larger game." Julian's face darkened, but he said nothing, his fingers stilling on the spoon. Poirot turned to Grayson, whose posture remained impeccable, though a bead of sweat glistened at his temple. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, the impeccable butler, your alibi was flawless, your movements accounted for by every witness except during the blackout, when a maid noticed your absence. The jeweler's loop in your quarters suggested a knowledge of Gimp's far beyond a servant's duties. When I staged the discovery of a false sapphire, your reaction betrayed you. Not guilt, but fear that your role in this charade was about to be exposed." Grayson's lips parted, but Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the silence like a bell. "Enough, Monsieur Poirot. You spun a fine tale, but I grow weary of these accusations. Tell us plainly who stole my sapphire." Poirot paused, his gaze locking onto Lady Eleanor's. The room seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. "The sapphire, Madame Ravenwood, was never stolen. It resides, even now, within the locket you wear around your neck." A gasp rippled through the guests. Lady Eleanor's hand flew to the ornate silver locket at her throat, her eyes widening in a performance of shock that Poirot found almost convincing. "This is absurd," she exclaimed. "My locket contains a portrait of my late husband, nothing more." "Permit me, madame," Poirot said, stepping forward with a bow. If you will open the locket, we shall see. The guests leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Lady Eleanor as she hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly. With a defiant tilt of her chin, she unclasped the locket and opened it. Nestled within, on a bed of velvet, was the Ravenwood sapphire, its deep blue facets catching the light like a star in the night sky. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But I took it. I hid it in the chandelier. You took a replica, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. A clever imitation, placed in the display case by Lady Eleanor herself. The real sapphire never left her possession. Sir Reginald's voice boomed. Across the table, what the devil is this, Poirot? Are you saying this was all a farce? Not a farce, Colonel, but a meticulously crafted drama, Poirot replied, his tone calm but unyielding. Lady Eleanor Ravenwood, you are the architect of this mystery. You invited me here not to solve a theft, but to expose the secrets of your guests. The sapphire was your bait, the blackout your stage, and the hidden passage your tool to manipulate. The events of that night. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked, her eyes narrowing. You overstep, Poirot. I invited you to protect my family's legacy, not to accuse me of treachery. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her with a gesture. Let us reconstruct the truth, step by step, for the benefit of all. The Ravenwood sapphire, with its legend of a curse, has long been a symbol of betrayal. You, madame, knew its power to draw out greed and deception. You orchestrated the blackout, using the hidden passage to replace the true sapphire with a replica. You ensured Miss Beaumont, burdened by debt, would seize the opportunity to steal it. You knew Monsieur March's obsession with the gem would make him a suspect, and you anticipated Colonel Thorne's curiosity would lead him to the passage, muddying the waters. And Monsieur Grayson, your loyal confidant, played his part to perfection, planting clues and maintaining the illusion of a theft. Grayson's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of pride. Lady Eleanor, however, leaned back in her chair, her expression a mix of defiance and grudging admiration. You are clever, Poirot, I'll grant you that, but why would I stage such a charade? What motive could I possibly have? Poirot's smile was almost pitying. Your motive, madame, was to unmask the vipers in your nest. Each guest here harbors a secret you wish to expose. Miss Beaumont's gambling debts threaten to disgrace your family's name, as she is your niece. Monsieur March's forged painting, sold under the Ravenwood patronage, risked tarnishing your reputation as an art collector. Colonel Thorne, your old friend, has been quietly selling family heirlooms to fund his retirement, a betrayal of your trust. And Grayson, your loyal butler, has been skimming profits from the estate's accounts, a fact you discovered only recently. The guests erupted in protests, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of denial. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Julian slammed his fist on the table, and Sir Reginald's face turned crimson with indignation. Grayson alone remained silent, his gaze fixed on Lady Eleanor, who raised a hand to quell the chaos. Silence, she commanded, her voice sharp as a whip. The room fell quiet, and she turned to Poirot, her eyes blazing. You've had your say, Monsieur Poirot. But you've no proof of these wild accusations. Proof, madame, Poirot said, producing a small notebook from his pocket. The little gray cells require no more than the truth. The coded note in Miss Beaumont's room, deciphered with the torn page from the library, was written in your hand, instructing her to check the chandelier. The jeweler's loop in Grayson's quarters bears your family crest, a gift from you to ensure his complicity. The replica sapphire, crafted with exquisite precision, was commissioned by you months ago. I found the receipt in your study, hidden in a ledger, and the hidden passage, known only to you and Grayson, was the key to your deception. Lady Eleanor's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her. You are relentless, Poirot, she said softly. Very well, I confess. I staged the theft to test my guests, to see who would crumble under the weight of their secrets. I wanted to know who I could trust in this house of shadows. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. Aunt Eleanor, how could you? You humiliated me, made me think I'd betrayed you. You did betray me, Clara, Lady Eleanor said, her tone softening. Your debts would have ruined us. I needed you to face your weakness, to see the path you were on. Julian's voice was bitter. And me, you used my art, my passion, to trap me in your game. Your forgery shamed me. Julian, Lady Eleanor replied. I gave you a chance to redeem yourself, to prove your loyalty. You failed. Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his voice gruff. I sold a few trinkets, Eleanor. Hardly a crime. Why drag me into this? Because loyalty is not divisible, Reginald, she said, her eyes cold. You took what was not yours to sell. Grayson stepped forward, his voice steady. And I, my lady, what was my sin? You stole from me, Grayson, Lady Eleanor said, her voice heavy with disappointment. Small sums, cleverly hidden, but theft nonetheless. I trusted you above all. Poirot clapped his hands, drawing their attention. And so, the curtain falls. The Ravenwood sapphire, safe in its locket, was never at risk. The curse, a mere legend, served to heighten the drama. Each of you was tested, and each of you revealed your truth. Lady Eleanor's cunning was matched only by her desire to protect. Her legacy, however, misguided her methods. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Lady Eleanor rose, her locket clutched tightly in her hand. You've exposed me, Poirot, but you've also freed me. I know now who stands with me and who does not. What will you do with this truth? Poirot bowed, his expression serene. I am a detective, madame, not a judge. My task was to solve the mystery, and that I have done. The rest is for you to resolve. As for me, I shall depart Ravenwood Manor, content that the little grey cells have triumphed once more. He turned to the guests, his eyes sweeping over them, with a mix of pity and resolve. Ms. Amos, let this be a lesson. Secrets, like shadows, cannot hide from the light of truth. Adieu. With that, Poirot strode from the dining hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The guests remained there, faces a tableau of shame, anger, and reluctant awe. Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing the moors in all their stark beauty. Poirot paused at the manor's gates, adjusting his hat against the chill. The Ravenwood sapphire, the curse, the secrets all were behind him now. He smiled faintly, his mind already turning to the next mystery that awaited the unparalleled. Hercule Poirot. As he boarded the carriage to take him back to the village, a single thought lingered. The sneakiest mysteries were not those of theft or murder, but of the human heart, where truth and deception danced an eternal waltz.